Who is the most powerful man in any heist? Not the one with the gun, not the driver threading a stolen vehicle through back streets at 100 miles an hour with law enforcement 2 minutes behind him. Not the hacker watching a progress bar fill while alarms escalate on every frequency in the building. Not the gunman holding 36 hostages face down on a bank floor while someone drills through a vault in the room behind him. In Grand Theft Auto V, the most powerful man in every one of those rooms is the one who was never in any of them. He plans from the outside, he watches from a distance. He has, on more than one occasion, described his approach to personal relationships using almost exactly the same language he uses for planning a robbery. His name is Lester Crest. By the time GTA Fizz story reaches its conclusion, Lester Crest has planned the robbery of a government gold reserve, directed the targeted assassination of 6 separate people, manipulated 2 stock markets to generate wealth approaching $2 billion, maintained a decade-long secret about a man's faked death, operated a secondary criminal empire under a voice disguise while running his primary one under his real name, helped dismantle an artificial intelligence weapon pointed at the city, and quietly become the single most consequential criminal in Los Santos without appearing on one wanted poster, without his name appearing on one law enforcement database, and without anyone who was not specifically supposed to know him having any idea he existed. He cannot drive without aggravating his hives. He brews his own moonshine in his living room. His email address, rendered in leet code, translates to Teabag I need. That specific combination is where Lester Crest stops being merely a video game character and starts being something genuinely unusual, a person whose capability and whose private reality exist at a distance from each other so enormous that the gap between them becomes its own kind of story. The man who can redirect city traffic control infrastructure in real time goes home to a bungalow in El Burro Heights with all its windows covered. The man who has read the private emails of corporate executives and hacked the systems of a major university is reachable at 346 102 and maintains a bleater account under Old Lester C, technically public, technically findable, while everything that matters about him is invisible. Jimmy DeSanta, Michael's son, calls him Uncle Les. The name comes up in dialogue during the family scenes of GTA 5's early chapters, casual and unremarked, as if it is the most natural thing in the world for a teenager to have an honorary uncle who is a criminal intelligence operator running heists out of a textile factory in La Mesa. But Uncle Les carries years inside it. It suggests a history of proximity, not friendship in the conventional sense, but the specific familiarity that comes from being present in a family's orbit long enough to accumulate a nickname, long enough for a child to grow up with you on the periphery as a recognizable and non-threatening adult. Lester was part of Michael DeSanta's world before Michael DeSanta existed, that he survived the transition from Michael Townley to the Rockford Hills retirement, that the connection between them persisted through 9 years of complete silence, says something about what Michael kept from his old life when he left it. The house on Amarillo Vista is worth examining carefully because houses tell the truth about their occupants in ways that conversations rarely do. Lester describes his address to Michael as being in Murrieta Heights. It is in El Burro Heights. That discrepancy is characteristic. Either he is misdirecting Michael about his exact location out of professional habit, or he is sufficiently uninterested in the specific geography of his own home that he has never verified which neighborhood the maps say he lives in. Both interpretations are consistent with the person the game presents. The windows are covered, not curtained, not frosted, not hung with thick fabric against the light, covered in the functional sense so that light neither enters nor exits from that direction, and no line of sight from the street penetrates the interior. The coverage is a practical decision rather than an aesthetic one. Someone lives here who has thought about who might be looking in and has concluded that the answer to that question should be no one. An Illuminati poster hangs on the wall. Whether this is ironic or sincere, whether it represents Lester genuinely believing in surveillance conspiracies, or Lester's dark joke at his own expense as someone who has spent years being the surveillance, the game never says. It simply hangs there, in a room full of covered windows, next to multiple computer monitors that are always running. The computers are always on. That is the detail worth holding, not sometimes on, not on when in use, always on, processing something, receiving something, presenting information in the particular format of someone who does not distinguish between working hours and non-working hours because the category of non-working hours does not meaningfully apply. The setup has the feel of permanent operation rather than use and shut down. Lester Crest does not close the laptop when the job is done. There is always another thread to follow. There is moonshine equipment, tubing connected to containers in the specific arrangement of a home distillation setup that is illegal under San Andreas law and presumably most other applicable legal frameworks, operated by a man who has enough actual criminal exposure in other directions that the moonshine barely registers as a risk. Nobody is coming to share it. The moonshine is for Lester, for the evenings between operations, and it is precisely the kind of project that occupies hands while the mind is running something else in the background. His mother's birthday is marked on a paper calendar on the wall. September 28th, circled, clearly visible, in a room otherwise occupied by the covered windows and the conspiracy poster and the ever-running computers and the illegal moonshine still. That detail creates a specific dissonance. A man who can access government databases and corporate email servers and has helped generate close to $2 billion in coordinated stock market positions has his mother's birthday written on a paper calendar in his living room. Presumably he calls on the date. Presumably she has no idea what her son does between those calls. His car, a blue Acia, sits outside most of the time unused. He says driving aggravates his hives. In the Diamond Casino heist dialogue, years later, he mentions that his eczema is clearing up now that he is spending less time in vehicles. His body reports in this way across conversations, a detail here, a condition noted there, each delivered in the same flat register he uses to discuss market positions or crew selection criteria, not as complaint, not as dramatic disclosure, as relevant information about a variable in the operating environment. He uses a wheelchair indoors. He can cover short distances with a cane. He has asthma that restricts his breathing and a body that, due to many years of limited mobility, carries more weight than it did earlier in his life, which compounds the original condition in the specific way that secondary problems compound primary ones. He manages all of this continuously and without apparent disruption to any other function. His body is a complicated variable. He has long since integrated it into the problem set. What the body left untouched was the mind, and what the mind did in the specific circumstances of Lester Crest's life was expand into every space the body vacated, not by inspiration, not as a compensatory narrative, as a practical consequence of significant analytical capacity combined with enormous available time and very few socially sanctioned activities to fill it with. The research goes where the research goes. When the research has nowhere specific to go, it goes everywhere available, and everything it finds gets filed. He has access to government databases. He can enter corporate email servers without authorization. He redirects city traffic control infrastructure during active operations. He monitors activity across 2 stock exchanges simultaneously. He maintains running files on criminal operators across San Andreas who have never heard his name. He knew about Patrick McReary from Liberty City before Franklin Clinton mentioned him. He had already assessed the Eastern European making moves in that city and found him not worth calling. He knew the Irish crew had mostly just disappeared. He knew Moses had found Jesus. This is not coincidence. This is what Lester Crest does with time when there is no active operation to direct it toward. He keeps current. He tracks the landscape. He maintains the database because at some point the database will be necessary, and when that point arrives, he intends to be ready. Before the Midwest, before Michael Townley and Trevor Phillips and the crew that changed the trajectory of everything, before the Darnell Brothers factory and the 9 years of waiting and the billion-dollar stock market plays. There was a university that said no, and a man who hacked their systems in response and found the experience so satisfying that he never stopped. That is where this story actually begins. If this is the kind of story you find yourself listening to when the night is quiet, hit subscribe. These take a while to build and it costs you nothing at all. Now back to Lester. The bye-bye has accumulated something like legendary status in GTA community memory for the specific reason that it captures Lester Crest's entire relationship to social interaction in 2 syllables. He has just helped prevent nuclear annihilation. Agent 14 and Phoenicia Rackman are standing at the Galileo Observatory with the particular post-crisis affect of government agents who have survived something they were not sure they were going to survive. The protagonist is there. The moment has the formal quality of a conclusion. Something significant has ended, and the people involved in it are standing in a location that is visually and narratively appropriate to the weight of what has just happened. Lester tried to participate in that moment. He produced a few sentences. They did not cohere into the kind of social exchange the setting seemed to call for. He assessed the situation, concluded that further attempts would not improve the outcome, summarized his experience of the operation with honest efficiency, horrifying, really horrifying, but also fun, and departed. The bye-bye specifically is not abrupt. It is not rude. It is the specific social register of someone who has decided the interaction is concluding and is narrating the conclusion in a format that acknowledges the other parties without making further demands on either of them, a wave, verbal form. The 3 acts of the Doomsday Heist had pushed Lester into professional territory he had not occupied before. He had coordinated heist operations. He had directed stock market manipulation. He had planned and managed criminal operations of significant scale and complexity across his career. The Doomsday operation required all of those skills and added to them the specific requirements of counter-terrorism intelligence work, threat assessment across an information environment being actively manipulated by the threat itself, coordination with government contacts whose reliability was unknown, and operational goals that were not financial but existential. He had risen to these requirements. He had been deceived earlier in the process than he would have liked. He had identified the deception and corrected his operational posture when the evidence became unavoidable. He had coordinated the conclusion successfully. The world continued, and then he said bye-bye and went home. The permanent cancellation of the wanted level fee was not the only accommodation he made in the aftermath. His overall availability to the protagonist shifted slightly, a warmth that was more visible than his usual professional baseline, a slightly shorter path to assistance, a faint quality of having been through something together that changed the texture of the professional relationship without being acknowledged directly. Lester does not acknowledge things of this kind directly. The relationship between Lester Crest and Georgina Cheng, as documented in the game's dialogue and the Cayo Perico photograph and the 2024 factory sale email, is the only romantic relationship in Lester's history that the game presents as real in the full sense. Reciprocal, sustained, mutual, resulting in a life change that neither party had individually planned. What Georgina saw in Lester before Mirror Park, in the research phase of her preparation, a man whose capability was extraordinary and whose private life was, from the outside, almost completely invisible, No public profile, no social presence, no documented personal relationships, an email address that encoded a juvenile joke in leet cipher, a phone number that, if called, produced a voice that was unhurried and dry, and always sounded like it was halfway through an analysis the call had interrupted. She looked at this and found it interesting rather than off-putting. That itself is specific. Most people who encountered Lester's particular combination of capability and social limitation found the combination exhausting, something to manage around, to root past, to extract the professional value from without requiring the full engagement with the person. Trevor found it exhausting and called him names. Michael valued him and found the relationship complicated. Franklin respected him and kept the relationship professional. Georgina had none of that previous context. She came to Lester fresh, with a research profile that described the capability without the relationship history. She found someone extraordinary, operating in conditions of chosen invisibility, and decided he was exactly what she imagined he would be. The 5 minutes to clone his phone, the constructed Mirror Park meeting, the "then maybe you'd do it for me," these were not impulsive. They were prepared. She had decided what she wanted, and she had prepared the mechanism for achieving it, the way Lester prepared mechanisms for achieving things, which is to say thoroughly and with the specific attention to detail that converts preparation into inevitability. He recognized this, presumably, at some point during or after Mirror Park. A person who hacks phones as efficiently as he does, who constructs personas and maintains intelligence networks and plans operations with this kind of deliberateness, encountering someone who had applied the same methodology to him was not a surprise. It was, if he was honest about it, the most appropriate introduction he had ever received. The hotel planning meetings in Richmond, where the Diamond Casino heist was organized, these were the period in which the transition happened most visibly. The crew noticed the different clothing. They noticed the stutter. They noticed that Lester, who was never unaware of the impression he made, was not running his normal monitoring on what impression he was making in Georgina's presence. He was present in the room rather than managing it from a slight remove. He was, in the vocabulary of his own private language, present, not across the street, not unannounced, at the table. The paradox that defines Lester Crest is not complicated to state, though it takes a while to fully absorb. He is the most capable criminal intelligence operator in Los Santos, and he lives in a bungalow. He has coordinated heist operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and his personal car is a blue Acia that he rarely drives because driving aggravates his hives. He once shot down Merryweather security helicopters with an RPG from a moving aircraft and then went home and played a military first-person shooter video game. The distance between the professional reality and the private one is not accidental. It is not the result of poor financial management or limited ambition. It is a considered arrangement, a life built with very deliberate attention to which parts of existence Lester Crest actually wants and which parts other people assume he should want. He does not display money because displaying money creates attention, and attention is what Lester's entire operational identity is designed to prevent. He does not cultivate a social life because his approach to social interaction, watching from across the street, arranging meetings and not attending them, hacking webcams rather than knocking on doors, is not the kind of approach that produces a social life in any conventional sense. He does not go places because going places requires the physical mobility that his condition has progressively made more difficult and more costly, and he has long since built his world around the things that do not require going places. The world he built is enormous. It just does not look like it from outside the covered windows. The bungalow is the surface, the garment factory in La Mesa is the working layer, and the intelligence infrastructure that connects them to every relevant database and communication channel and financial system in Los Santos is the thing that actually matters, the thing that, by the time GTA 5 begins, has made Lester Crest the kind of person that Michael DeSanta drives to the door of in a crisis and knocks. He always answers, he always has the information, he always has two approaches ready. The GTA Online protagonist who worked with Long John Teabag and separately worked with Lester Crest across the various heist and job series had, by the time the Diamond Casino heist confirmed the identity behind the LJT persona, accumulated enough experience with both to recognize the quality that connected them, the thoroughness, the comprehensive preparation, the ability to see the financial layer of a criminal operation that most operators did not know existed, the slightly dry humor, the lack of any interest in pretending that what they were doing was anything other than what it was. Both voices had these qualities. The voice changer changed the delivery. It did not change the underlying intelligence. The open road network, as a criminal logistics operation, served a real market. GTA Online's MC businesses, drug labs, document forgery operations, counterfeiting facilities, cannabis farms, required supply chain management, distribution coordination, law enforcement avoidance, and the kind of ongoing operational oversight that most criminal operators did not have the infrastructure to provide themselves. Long John Teabag provided it. Players who used the service got better outcomes than players who did not. The service was worth the cut. Lester built it because he saw the market opportunity and found the architecture of building it more interesting than watching it remain unbuilt. The money was a consequence. The money was always a consequence. The building was the point. Consider what the email address told anyone paying attention. T30B4GG99find.info. Leet code Teabag99. A joke made at his own expense, embedded in the most permanent and functional digital identifier he maintained across his professional career. His phone number changed when operational security required. His bleater was a presence rather than a personality. But the email, the address that people used to reach him for jobs, that his crew knew, that his clients used, was a pun about a teabag, rendered in the specific cipher that a certain generation of internet users adopted when they wanted to say something without technically saying it. He had been Teabag99 for long enough that the name had lost whatever embarrassment it might have once carried and had simply become his, the same way that the green checkered shirt had stopped being a choice and become a uniform. The same way that Space 103.2 had stopped being a preference and become the default. The same way that the moonshine had stopped being an experiment and become something he made. The private personality that the public criminal record completely obscured, the video game player, the moonshine brewer, the man who changed the radio the moment he was alone in someone else's car. This personality was not the opposite of the criminal mastermind. It was the same person. The distance between them was manufactured and maintained for operational reasons. Remove the operational requirements and the person underneath was Teabag9 playing Righteous Slaughter 7 in a room with covered windows, with his mother's birthday on the wall and a batch of moonshine in the corner. That person arranged dates online and watched them from across the street. That same person, having met Georgina Cheng, went to Del Perro Pier and stood at a carnival booth and threw things at targets until he won a stuffed animal to give to her. The distance collapsed for exactly one person. That is the part the law does not usually talk about. The man who controlled everything had one thing he could not manage his way around, and he stood at the booth and threw until he won, and the photograph was taken, and it exists. The 2024 factory sale marked something specific in the geometry of Lester's life. The garment factory on Popular Street in La Mesa had been his for 20 years. He had purchased it in 2004, and it had housed, across those 2 decades, the criminal planning infrastructure of the most significant heist career in Los Santos. Every major job had been organized from that back room. The planning boards that had covered the wall, The Union Depository, the FIB headquarters, the Vangelico store, dozens of online heist operations had all been drawn in that space. He sold it to the protagonist he had worked with longer than anyone outside of Michael de Santa. The gesture had the quality of a final professional transfer. I am done with this and you are not, so it should be yours. The building was operational capacity. He no longer needed operational capacity in that form. The email Georgina sent alongside his was brief and warm in the specific way that Georgina's documented communications tended toward: direct, intelligent, aware of what the moment required, and not requiring more than that. They were together. He was retired. The building was the protagonist's. What Lester kept, the game does not specify. The planning habit, presumably, the monitoring instinct, his mother's birthday on a calendar somewhere, space 103.2, the moonshine equipment, perhaps moved to a different location with different windows, covered in the same way the Amarillo Vista windows had always been covered. The blue Acia was probably still outside wherever he was. He still did not drive it much. Rockstar Games gave Lester Crest a wasting disease and deliberately never named it. That was a considered decision, arrived at and held throughout the game's development. Clinical terminology would have invited a particular kind of attention, medical, categorical, focused on the specific diagnosis rather than on the person managing it. The game's writers chose not to invite that attention. What they provided instead is a functional description in the character notes and in what the game shows, a condition that has gradually worn down Lester's motor skills over the course of his adult life, advancing at its own pace by its own logic, leaving him with a wheelchair for most indoor movement and a cane for the short distances he covers on foot when the situation requires it. Fan communities have speculated, as they always do, ALS, muscular dystrophy, Marfan syndrome. All of these appear in community discussions, none confirmed because the game put no confirmation in. The disease is real in what it does to Lester. Its name is deliberately withheld. Understanding what it actually does requires holding several conditions simultaneously because they compound each other. There is the underlying wasting condition itself, the progressive narrowing of motor function, the muscle weakness that advances at its own pace and cannot be reversed. Sitting on top of that is the asthma, which limits his breathing in ways that make physical exertion more costly, even when some degree of physical function is available. On top of that is the weight, which has accumulated across years of restricted mobility in the way that weight does when a body cannot move through the range of activity that would ordinarily regulate it, not a character failing, but a physiological consequence of the underlying condition, though it compounds the original problem by making each of its elements slightly heavier and more demanding to manage, and then the hives from driving. The eczema that clears, as Lester himself notes in Diamond Casino Heist dialogue when he is not spending time in vehicles. His nervous system responds to specific stressors with immune reactions that other people's bodies do not produce in the same circumstances, an additional variable in a body already managing several significant ones. These conditions existed simultaneously and interacted. They produced a physical reality that was not static but ongoing, something he managed daily across his entire adult life, something he adjusted to constantly as it progressed, something he had integrated so completely into his sense of normal by the time GTA 5's story begins that he mentioned each component the way someone might mention traffic conditions on their commute, relevant when applicable, not worth dwelling on otherwise. But in his younger years, in the period after his education and before the Midwest, when he was attempting to step into the kind of life that educational achievement is supposed to make accessible, these conditions were more definitively limiting, because the routes that seemed most naturally suited to what he could do led through institutions that were built around the assumption of a different kind of body. He completed his education. This is established by implication through the ULSA story. You do not apply for university faculty positions without the relevant qualifications. He studied something. The game never specifies what, though the breadth of his subsequent knowledge suggests a program that developed genuine analytical range rather than narrow specialization. He earned whatever credential the position required. He had the qualifications. He applied for a faculty position at the University of San Andreas, Los Santos. They said no. The game does not record the committee's deliberations or the grounds they cited or the specific language of the rejection letter. What it gives is the outcome and Lester's response to it, delivered in passing during an early conversation with Michael. He applied for the faculty job. They rejected him. He hacked their systems. And the hack, he says, never gets old. That phrase carries the timeline. The word never means this is ongoing. Not something he did once in anger and put behind him, but something he maintains. Whatever access or arrangement he created in response to the rejection, he has kept it active or has kept the memory of it in the specific place that produces satisfaction rather than receding into the past as a closed chapter. Years have elapsed. His career has developed well beyond any outcome the faculty position could have produced, and the hack persists, or persists in memory, because maintaining it is pleasurable in the way that small private victories over institutions that underestimated you are pleasurable. The reason for the rejections is never stated, but the circumstantial evidence points clearly enough. Academic careers require physical presence. Lectures are delivered in rooms to students who are physically in those rooms. Office hours assume a professor who can be in an office and available in the way that physical accessibility means. Laboratory supervision means being in a laboratory. The entire professional performance of a university faculty member is organized around the assumption that the performer can navigate physical space with the mobility that institutional environments take for granted. Lester's mobility did not look like that. Whatever accommodation ULSA was or was not prepared to make, the outcome was a rejection letter, and the rejection letter was followed within whatever time frame his particular approach to grievance required by unauthorized access to their university systems. He routed around the obstacle. He always routes around obstacles. What came next, the move toward criminal work, was not a romantic choice. It was not a person deciding that heist planning sounded more interesting than academic employment. It was the end of a process of elimination. The conventional paths required physical presence he could not reliably provide. The academic world had declined to accommodate his specific combination of capability and limitation. What remained were paths that cared about outputs rather than performances, about what you could produce rather than how you looked while producing it. The criminal world, specifically the planning and intelligence function within criminal operations, happened to be precisely that kind of environment. The planner does not enter the building. The person who knows everything about the target does not need to walk through it to know it. The intelligence scout stays outside the operation and provides from outside. His wheelchair was not a variable in the operational risk calculation. The Midwest was where Lester found people who needed what he could provide and did not care about anything else, not because those people were enlightened about disability. Trevor Phillips, for instance, called him Wheels and demonstrated throughout their association that enlightenment was not among his defining characteristics, but because in the specific professional context of a Midwestern heist crew in the early 2000s, what mattered was whether the planning was good. The planning was good. Everything else was secondary. He had found his environment. It happened to be illegal. That was the specific shape of the gap between what he could offer and what the legitimate world would accept. The space, practically speaking, was this: a computer, a network connection, and the willingness to sit with a research problem longer than anyone else would. Those three things turned out to be sufficient to build one of the most capable private intelligence infrastructures in the GTA universe. The specific academic program he completed is never named, but the breadth of his subsequent knowledge, financial systems and corporate governance, law enforcement operations and institutional security protocols, software architecture and systems vulnerabilities, criminal organization patterns across multiple regions and periods suggests something broad rather than narrow. Not a specialist who learned one domain deeply, but someone who used education as a scaffold for a wider kind of learning that predated and outlasted any formal program. The rejection by ULSA was not an isolated event. It was the final confirmation of a pattern that had been building since the physical realities of his condition became visible to the institutional world he was trying to enter. Every environment organized around presence and performance, classrooms, laboratories, office environments, the social ecosystem of academic life with its conferences and seminars, and informal professional networking that happened standing up at receptions, had the same underlying assumption built into it. Your body can do this. His body could not do all of it, not reliably, not with the consistency that institutional membership requires. The hack he ran on ULSA's systems after the rejection was not just revenge, though it was that too. It was also proof of concept. It demonstrated to him, in a form that the rejection had made necessary to demonstrate, that what he could access without being physically present was more than sufficient to compensate for everything physical presence was supposed to provide. He could reach more from a chair in a room than most people reached on their feet. The rejection proved it by forcing the demonstration. That proof of concept did not leave him. The ULSA hack stayed active or stayed in memory as the foundational demonstration of a principle he would spend the rest of his career extending. The intelligence scout who never enters the building, the planner who stays outside, the man who knows everything about the target from a position of complete physical remove. This was not a style preference, it was the logical development of a capability that had been proven necessary. What the Midwest gave him was the professional context to make that capability productive. The criminal world, specifically the planning intelligence function within a criminal operation, happened to be exactly the environment where physical presence during the job was a liability rather than a requirement. The planner who stays outside cannot be arrested inside. The intelligence scout who remains at remove is not a risk variable in the operational profile. His limitations were, in this specific professional application, structural advantages. He built the career from that foundation. The Midwest operation, Michael, Trevor, the crew that moved through it across several years, was the first full expression of what he could do when the environment asked only for outputs and not for presence. The specific irony of the ULSA situation, the university that rejected Lester Crest for a faculty position he was qualified for, whose systems he subsequently hacked and has maintained unauthorized access to for years, is that the knowledge and analytical capability the university would have employed in a narrow institutional context became, in the criminal context that followed the rejection, far more expansively applied than any academic career could have accommodated. A faculty member at ULSA would have produced research within a specific discipline, taught courses, supervised graduate students, published within the norms of an academic field. The scope would have been defined and bounded by the institution. Lester's scope, unbounded by institutional walls, expanded into every direction that was accessible and interesting. His financial analysis covered multiple stock exchanges and the specific pressure points of a dozen industries. His security analysis covered government institutional protocols, private security firm operational standards, and the software vulnerabilities of systems from law enforcement dispatch to corporate communications. His criminal intelligence covered the operating landscape of a major American city and extended into at least 2 other major metropolitan areas. The Rejection, paradoxically, was the best professional outcome Lester Crest ever received. He did not see it that way at the time. He hacked their systems, but the path the Rejection forced him onto produced a version of Lester Crest far more capable than any institutional version would have been. He still keeps the hack running. It never gets old. The game gives us almost nothing about the Midwest years. This is deliberate and probably the right choice. Rockstar built GTA 5 around protagonists whose pre-story history is felt rather than shown, whose relationships carry weight from evidence in the present rather than exposition about the past. The Midwest, the shared criminal history that connects Michael, Trevor, and Lester, surfaces in dialogue in the specific ease that old professionals have with each other, in references so compressed they assume familiarity rather than building it. What the references establish: Lester met Michael Townley and Trevor Phillips at some unspecified point in the early 2000s. He became a regular member of their heist crew. He operated as the planning and intelligence component of the operation, and across whatever span of time the Midwest period covered, the 3 of them developed the particular professional dynamic that GTA 5 depicts when they are eventually in the same room. It is worth understanding that dynamic precisely because the 3 roles it contains are not interchangeable, and the game never suggests they are. Michael was the front, the face, the one who could walk into a situation requiring performed confidence and sustain that performance under conditions that would break most people's composure. He read rooms accurately and adjusted to them quickly. He knew when pressure helped and when it backfired, when to push and when to step back and let a situation develop on its own. He was also, by the available evidence of everything the game shows about his inner life, someone who carried significant weight, who worried about what they were doing, who wanted on some level to be different from who he was, who aged visibly under the accumulating pressure of decisions that could not be undone. But in the moments that the job required, Michael DeSanta was exactly the person you wanted in front of the problem. Trevor was the force. He possessed a capacity to function in situations saturated with violence and chaos that other people did not match, could not match, and in most cases would not want to match. The academic term for what Trevor experienced is not entirely clear even within the game. He is portrayed with genuine complexity rather than as a caricature, but the functional reality was that the risk-fear calculation that stops most people from attempting certain things did not stop Trevor in the same way or at the same threshold. He could do things that other operators would not attempt because the mathematics that governed his personal risk tolerance were organized differently. He was also, and this needs to be stated plainly because the game never softens it, a catastrophic management problem, volatile, impulsive, constitutionally resistant to plans that placed constraints on his personal latitude, capable of converting a well-designed operation into a crisis through a single decision made in the 40 seconds before anyone had planned to do anything yet. Managing Trevor Phillips was, by Michael's own later account, a full-time occupation that nobody had formally signed up for, and that Lester, in particular, seemed to find exhausting in the specific way that a person with Lester's relationship to analytical order finds things that operate on no discernible logic exhausting. He called Trevor unprintable things, in that flat tone that was more cutting than any volume could manage. And Lester was the reason any of it worked, not a modest claim. The game supports it. What Lester provided was the specific category of intelligence that separates a capable crew from an excellent one, the information that nobody else had access to, organized and delivered before the crew needed it, in a form that converted a dangerous unknown into a managed set of risks with identified mitigation strategies. He knew the alarm system's software version and which documented flaw in that version was exploitable. He knew which manager called in sick on which afternoons and which workflow that left undermanned. He knew about the maintenance entrance where the alarm had been disabled 6 months ago because it kept triggering accidentally and nobody had filed the re-enablement paperwork. This is the specific intelligence that does not appear in publicly available information about a target, that is not visible in physical reconnaissance of the building, that requires the kind of patient, sustained database research that people with full physical mobility do not generally develop. Because people with full physical mobility can conduct reconnaissance, can watch the target from across the street, can gather surface-level information through presence rather than through systems access. Lester could not conduct surveillance across the street as a primary method. He had developed something better. Michael Townley was a capable bank robber before Lester Crest joined his crew. What he was after Lester joined was a substantially different category of operator. The difference was information, the quality and depth of advanced knowledge that the crew carried into every job, the reliability of the risk assessment they operated on, the probability that the plan would hold across the range of conditions that jobs actually encounter rather than the conditions that planning sessions imagine. The crew took on jobs that a crew without Lester's preparation could not have considered. The margin between success and catastrophe was, in every case, the planning. The planning was Lester. The crew extended beyond the core three. Brad Snyder was a regular enough presence to be on the Ludendorff job in 2004. The people Trevor called the Irish Crazies moved through the operation at some point and were apparently capable in ways that their other qualities made complicated. The Southern crew that, by Lester's 2013 accounting, all went down, collectively, in some unspecified event that Lester summarizes with the compression of someone who has already processed the information and no longer needs the detail to convey the meaning. An Eastern European operating in Liberty City who Lester tracked and assessed and decided was not worth calling. He tracked all of them, the ones he used and the ones he did not, the ones who were still operating and the ones who had been taken off the board by arrest, by death, or in at least one case, Moses, by a spiritual conversion sufficiently complete to end the professional relationship permanently. He maintained current awareness of the entire landscape relevant to his crew's operations, not because any specific job required it at any specific moment, but because being ready was his default state and readiness required currency. The Midwest years produced results across multiple operations. The game does not reconstruct those operations. It does not need to. Their existence is evident in the professional dynamic of the GTA 5 present, in the particular ease with which Michael and Lester fall back into their working arrangement, in the absence of any need to explain to each other what each person does, in the specific way Lester talks about the Midwest period as something that worked rather than something that eventually ended. It did eventually end. In 2004, a cash storage facility in Ludendorff, North Yankton, was proposed as the next target, and Lester, for the first and what would turn out to be the last time before the catastrophe it produced, said no and was ignored. The specific texture of working with Michael and Trevor was, by implication from everything the game shows about those relationships in 2013, something that required continuous navigation. Michael was manageable, more than manageable. Michael was, in the professional context, an asset that Lester's intelligence made significantly more valuable. Michael respected the planning process. He asked questions about it. He engaged with the analysis in the specific way of someone who understood that the quality of the intelligence was the difference between clean and catastrophic. He might push back on a specific conclusion. He would not dismiss the process. Trevor was a different problem. Trevor's approach to planning was, at best, to listen to the plan until it told him something he found inconvenient, and then to mentally mark that element as provisional and subject to revision on the day. At worst, Trevor would agree to a plan and then encounter a variable during execution that he found more interesting than the plan and respond to the variable rather than continue following the plan. The result was that Lester's preparation on Trevor jobs always had to account for the possibility that Trevor would introduce an unplanned element at the most sensitive moment. He did this not because he didn't understand the plan. He understood the plan. He simply found the unplanned more compelling and had the specific relationship to consequences that made the risk of introducing the unplanned acceptable to him. Lester found this maddening in the way that a systems analyst finds exceptions maddening, not because the exception is surprising, but because the exception is a known problem that has no clean solution. You cannot plan around Trevor's impulsivity with the same tools you use to plan around a building's security system. A security system behaves according to its programming. Trevor behaves according to Trevor. Brad Snyder was, from what the game implies about his role in the crew, a more conventional presence, capable, available, reliable within a defined operational scope, and sufficiently predictable that Lester's assessments of him could be updated with confidence when new job-relevant information arrived. Brad was the crew member who filled the gap between Michael's negotiator function and Trevor's force function with something closer to standard skilled criminal labor. He was on the Ludendorff job because he was available and suited to the role, and because Lester was not there to point out the problems with that specific combination of factors. The Midwest years were productive enough that when they ended, Lester's primary professional loss was not the income, but the purpose. The intelligence function was intact. The capability was still there. What was gone was the application, the crew that had needed what he could provide and had used it consistently well enough to make the work worthwhile. He took that function to Los Santos and rebuilt around it from scratch, with no clients and no active jobs and no timeline for when either would appear. He built anyway, because the alternative was stopping, and Lester Crest does not stop. What Michael valued in Lester, and what he expressed, in the specific way Michael expressed things he valued, which was obliquely and in context rather than directly, was reliability in the particular form that Lester's intelligence function provided, not personal reliability, not the warmth of a friendship that could be counted on in the social sense, professional reliability. The plan will hold. The intelligence was checked. The contingency was built. In the Midwest, that reliability was what made the difference between operations that worked and operations that did not. Michael had worked jobs without Lester's kind of preparation, the standard criminal approach where you case a location and make a plan and adjust when the plan meets reality. He knew what that looked like. He knew what the gap looked like between what you knew in advance and what you found when the job started. With Lester's preparation, that gap was dramatically smaller, not eliminated. The gap is never eliminated, but reduced to a range where the contingencies Lester had built in advance were adequate to cover it. That was the difference. That was what Michael kept coming back to in the 9 years between Ludendorff and the Rockford Hills doorstep when he thought about what the operation had been. It had been, with Lester, something that worked. The specific reasoning Lester used to refuse the Ludendorff job is never fully reconstructed in GTA 5. Michael references the refusal during the game's events, notes that Lester went against the Ludendorff job, that he had warned them, that going ahead without his sign-off was a decision that produced exactly the outcome Lester's instinct had suggested it would. But what specifically in Lester's analysis of the Ludendorff target made him say no is not given in the dialogue. The game offers the conclusion he was right, Without the full argument, what can be reconstructed from Lester's approach to planning, as demonstrated consistently across GTA 5, is the kind of analysis that would have produced a no. His assessments begin with information availability and confidence. How complete is the intelligence on the target? How reliable are the sources that produced it? What are the identifiable gaps? And how large is the risk that resides in those gaps? Ludendorff presented specific research problems that his Los Santos-based networks would have struggled with: geographic distance from his primary information access points, a smaller market with different institutional patterns, different security standards, different law enforcement response profiles, less overlap between the systems he could access and the systems relevant to the specific target. He would have been working with lower confidence intelligence than his operational standard required, producing a plan with more genuine unknowns than he was comfortable certifying as ready. Beyond the information problem, there is something else Lester describes when he talks about his approach to decisions: the capacity to integrate a large number of partially observed variables into a single operational assessment that registers before it can be fully articulated. The warning feeling that arrives when the variables that you can see are arranging themselves in a pattern that the variables you cannot see are likely to be consistent with. He felt something wrong about Ludendorff. He said no. Michael and Trevor went anyway. Brad Snyder went with them. GTA 5 opens in that small North Yankton town in a cash storage robbery that is already clearly going wrong. The getaway driver was supposed to be Amanda Townley, Michael's wife. Amanda was not there. The withdrawal from the facility goes wrong. Michael's crew is scattered. Brad is shot. Michael himself is shot, lying in a snowfield when FIB agent Dave Norton approaches. The deal that existed between Norton and Michael Townley, made prior to the Ludendorff heist, made in the specific circumstances of a man who had been thinking about how to exit the criminal life without going to prison, was this: Michael would provide testimony against other major criminals in the Midwest operation. Names, information, operational details sufficient to produce prosecutions. In return, witness protection, a new identity, a funded life somewhere clean, the erasure of Michael Townley and the creation of Michael DeSanta. The mechanism of the disappearance was the botched heist. Michael would be killed in North Yankton. Brad Snyder would take the arrest. Trevor would believe both partners were gone, and Michael Townley would become, in a Rockford Hills mansion funded by the federal government, someone who had never existed in the criminal world. None of this was visible to Lester in the days after the heist. What Lester received through whatever channels criminal information travelled in 2004 was the news that the Ludendorff job had fallen apart. Michael was apparently dead. Brad was in federal custody. Trevor had made it out of North Yankton alive and was somewhere, but was not reachable and was not Lester's immediate concern. The crew that had structured his professional life for years was gone. The arrangement that had given his intelligence function a purpose, the crew that needed what he provided and paid him accordingly, did not exist anymore. He moved to Los Santos. He purchased the Darnell Brothers Garment Factory on Popular Street in La Mesa. He purchased other properties. He began building. And at some point in the months following his arrival in Los Santos, through the patient, continuous background research that was his natural mode of operation, he found Michael. A name that appeared where it should not appear, a financial pattern that was inconsistent with a dead man's profile, a record in a system he had access to that pointed to a live person rather than a closed file. The specific form of the evidence is never described in the game, but the conclusion it produced is stated directly. Lester knew Michael was alive in Los Santos, living as Michael DeSanta, protected by a FIB arrangement he had made over Brad Snyder's effectively certain imprisonment. He told no one. Michael, meanwhile, had not mentioned Lester's name to the FIB. The arrangement between Michael and Dave Norton covered the criminals Michael chose to give up. He chose not to give up Lester. This kept Lester off any federal list connecting him to the Midwest Operations disbanded crew, ensuring that whatever investigation followed the Ludendorff cleanup did not extend to the one member who had not been present. 2 men. Mutual protection across 9 years of complete silence without negotiation or confirmation or any contact at all. Lester knew Michael was alive and said nothing. Michael presumably understood that Lester might know and said nothing. The silence held because each of them maintained it independently without any mechanism to enforce it except individual judgment. That is a remarkable thing. In criminal circles, where information is currency and leverage is protection and the value of a secret is precisely what it can be exchanged for, 2 people sat on the most significant secret about each other for 9 years without blinking. For Lester, those 9 years were the construction period. The garment factory in La Mesa became slowly and continuously something more than a front. It became the headquarters of a private intelligence operation that had no current clients and no active operations, but which maintained itself in a state of readiness that, by 2013, made it one of the most capable criminal support infrastructures in Los Santos. He built, he waited, he was ready. In 2013, Michael DeSanta attached a cable from his SUV to the structural supports of a Rockford Hills property he believed belonged to Kyle Chavis, who had been sleeping with his wife. He drove away. The house came down. The property belonged to Martin Madrazo, who was a cartel boss. The waiting ended. The 9 years between Ludendorff and Michael's reappearance at his door were not a waiting period in the passive sense. They were the most productive construction period of Lester's professional life, and they were productive precisely because there was no operational pressure to direct the output anywhere specific. When you are building intelligence infrastructure for a crew that needs results on a timeline, the infrastructure serves the timeline. You research what the job requires. You maintain awareness of what the upcoming jobs are likely to require. The intelligence function is downstream of the operational requirement. When there is no operational requirement, the intelligence function runs freely. It expands into whatever is interesting and available. It pursues threads that no specific job has created and maintains awareness of conditions that no specific operation has yet made relevant. The coverage becomes broader. The depth becomes more consistent. The assessments of available crew members are maintained long after any specific reason for maintaining them has passed, because maintaining them is what the system does when it has no other direction. Lester's 9 years in Los Santos without an active crew produced the most comprehensive private criminal intelligence database in the city, not because he was trying to build something to a specification, because the building was what he did when nothing else was required, and 9 years of undirected building produced something larger than any directed project could have planned. He knew more about the criminal landscape of Los Santos in 2013 than any law enforcement agency operating in the same city. He knew it because he had been tracking it continuously for 9 years, for no reason other than that tracking it was what he did. When Michael knocked on his door, that database was ready. The 9 years of work was the answer to the 9 years of waiting. The Darnell Brothers garment factory on Popular Street in La Mesa was built in the 1920s. The building still carries the proportions of that era. The industrial ceiling heights, the floor plan designed around machinery that once produced actual clothes for actual people, the loading dock that now serves different purposes than the ones it was built for. The architectural bones of a real manufacturing facility occupied by something that functions as a manufacturing facility in the way a stage set functions as a room, convincingly, from the right angle, for the specific purpose of convincing people who are not looking too carefully. Lester purchased the factory along with several other properties when he moved to Los Santos after 2004. He staffed it, Guadalupe Romero appears in the factory's employment records. Other workers rotate through. By 2013, when GTA 5's events begin, 2 union representatives have visited the factory on at least 2 separate occasions to address conditions and pay disputes. The friction is documented. The business is real enough to generate real labor problems, which means it is real enough to sustain the cover. The cover is that this is a garment factory. The reality is that the building's most significant function is the planning board on the wall of its back room. The board is large. It is covered in photographs connected by string to locations, to names, to dates, to vehicle types, to guard schedules, to access point assessments, to software version numbers, to financial structures. Dozens of overlapping categories of information that together represent a target rendered complete, made visible, made arguable, made into something that can be walked through and tested before any of it becomes operational. It looks, to someone who does not know what they are looking at, like the workspace of a person who processes a great deal of information with unusual intensity. To someone who does know, it is a heist plan in diagram form. Lester fills this board with both hands. The game documents this. He appears to be ambidextrous or close to it, drawing from whichever side is convenient without appearing to distinguish between them. Whether this is a trait Jay Kleitz brought to the performance or something Rockstar specifically built into the character, the consistency of it across the planning scenes suggests it was noticed and preserved rather than incidentally captured. The factory and the bungalow on Amarillo Vista represent 2 distinct theatres of Lester's private life, and they are worth understanding as a pair. The factory is where his professional identity lives. The planning board, the organised criminal infrastructure, the information flows feeding into a central point and being organised into operational products. It is the most visible form of what he does, the thing that other people can observe and engage with, the surface of his capability that his clients and collaborators are meant to see. The bungalow is where everything else lives, and everything else is considerably more revealing. He brews moonshine. The equipment is visible from his first scene in the bungalow, tubing connecting containers in the specific arrangement of a home distillation setup, the kind of project that requires patience and attention across multiple stages and cannot be rushed, that produces something nobody can buy for him because the point is to have made it himself. It is illegal in San Andreas. He does not seem to have spent more than 0 seconds considering that this matters, which is consistent with a man who has more significant legal exposure in every other direction. He hacks webcams. He says this to Franklin Clinton in dialogue after the bureau raid without apparent awareness that it requires careful framing. He says he will reverse engineer a webcam and spy on those sorority girls again, phrasing the activity as a return to an established hobby rather than a disclosure of something new. The word again is the operative one. This is not something Lester does occasionally or experimentally. It is a regular private activity, conducted the way other people watch television, that he mentions in the same paragraph as, or drink some moonshine, 2 leisure activities of equivalent register in his personal accounting. He arranges to meet women online. He appears at the meeting locations. He watches from across the street or from some other removed vantage point. He does not introduce himself. He does not approach. He watches the date he arranged happen without him, from a distance that ensures he is not part of it in any way the other person would recognize. He says, "I like my scores like I like my dates," across the street and unaware they're being watched. He says this as a joke. He also means it. The distance that defines his professional strategy, the planner who never enters the building, the intelligence scout who stays outside the operation, is the same distance that defines his personal relationships. He is always the observer. He is always at the remove. The structure of how he relates to the world has a consistency across professional and personal domains that suggests it is not a professional choice applied to the professional context. It is a way of being that predates the career. His email address, t345g990find.info, translates from leet code to Teabag 99. This has been his digital identity for long enough that it functions as a permanent signature, not a throwaway account but a sustained presence under a name that is, even encoded, his own joke at his own expense. His phone number is 36552. His bleater is a Lester C. The public-facing information exists and is findable. The person behind it is completely invisible. His favorite radio station is Space 103.2. When Michael leaves him alone in a car for even a few minutes, Lester changes the radio to Space 103.2. He does not ask. He changes it. When Michael returns, the station is different from whatever it was before, and Lester has the air of someone who made a reasonable improvement to the available conditions and is not going to justify it. His mother's birthday is September 28th, marked on a paper calendar on the wall of the bungalow, a detail so specific and so domestic that it sits oddly in the context of everything surrounding it. The covered windows, the Illuminati poster, the moonshine equipment, the computers that never sleep. But that is Lester Crest fully rendered, a man whose private world contains his mother's birthday written on a paper calendar alongside everything else, not in tension with it, just present in it, the way ordinary human things are present in extraordinary people's lives. He played Righteous Slaughter 7, the in-game franchise that GTA 5 uses to satirize military shooter culture was, according to the available evidence, one of his documented recreational activities. He played it with the consistent, dedicated attention he brought to every other problem he engaged with seriously, which suggests he played it well. The garment factory, in those 9 years between Ludendorff and the reunion, was not dormant. It was not waiting for Michael to come back and give it a purpose. Lester was building something continuously across that period, an intelligence infrastructure that had no current clients and no active jobs and no operational requirement, but which maintained itself in a state of readiness that became, by 2013, the most capable private criminal intelligence resource in Los Santos. He maintained awareness of the city's criminal ecosystem not because anyone was paying him to, but because that is what Lester Crest does with time. He tracks, he files, he updates the assessments when new information arrives, he keeps the database current, he knows who is operating and who is not, and who will be available when availability matters, and what each of them will cost, and where each of them has previously failed under pressure. When Michael knocked on his door in 2013, Lester did not have to build anything. He had 9 years of building already done. He just had to open the file. The garment factory workers deserve a moment. Guadalupe Romero and the others who worked the legitimate side of the Darnell Brothers operation across those years, they had no idea what the building they worked in was actually housing. The union representatives who visited twice to negotiate conditions and pay issues knew about the textile equipment and the production schedules and the management communication practices that they found inadequate. They did not know about the planning board in the back room, the modified equipment stored behind it, the criminal contacts who came and went through the loading dock during off hours. The legitimacy of the front business was maintained by being real. Real employees, real production, real union disputes, real payroll, real complaints about working conditions. The cover story held because the cover story was not entirely a story. Lester managed both operations, the criminal infrastructure and the functional garment business, with the same quality of attention he brought to everything else. The union negotiations were handled without escalating to the point where official oversight would have been invited into the premises. The production schedules were maintained well enough to sustain the business's existence without drawing the kind of inquiry that a failing or fraudulent business would attract. The balance was, by the evidence of the factory's survival across 9 years of this arrangement, achieved and maintained. This is unremarkable in the context of everything else Lester managed simultaneously. Running a legitimate textile business as cover while building a private criminal intelligence infrastructure is, by his standards, a modest operational requirement. He handled it the way he handled everything, with complete preparation, no visible effort, and the particular outcome of the thing working exactly as designed. The planning board in the back room was populated with new content the day Michael returned, 9 years of unoccupied potential activated by a single knock on the bungalow door on Amarillo Vista in El Burro Heights. Lester had been ready. Michael DeSanta arrived at Lester's door. The circumstances that sent him there were, in isolation, absurd. He had attached a cable from the back of his SUV to the structural supports of a Rockford Hills property he believed belonged to Kyle Chavis, a tennis coach who had been having an affair with Amanda DeSanta. He had driven the SUV away from the property until the property was no longer standing. The property did not belong to Kyle Chavis. It belonged to Martin Madrazo, whose title was not tennis coach and whose interest in its reconstruction was backed by significantly more leverage than a civil court judgment. The resulting financial obligation exceeded what Michael's FIB witness protection pension covered. He needed to make money the way he had made money before. He needed Lester. Lester unlocked the door. The staging of this moment in the game is efficient and precisely calibrated. Michael knocks. There is a pause. Lester, inside at his computers, taking the unhurried time of someone for whom unscheduled arrivals are infrequent enough to require a moment of verification before response. The door opens. Lester looks at the man standing there. "I was wondering when you'd show up." 9 years in that sentence, not warmth exactly, not coldness either, but the particular flat acknowledgement of someone who has run the calculation forward and knows what answer it produces. Michael was in a life designed by the federal government to suppress his original instincts, in a house in Rockford Hills with a deteriorating marriage and children who resented him and a therapist who was embezzling from their sessions. The pressure was going to build until something broke. Lester had been waiting for the break. Michael, apparently operating under the residual fiction of his own death in a way that he immediately recognizes as obviously pointless when confronted with Lester's face, says that he has been dead. Lester says, "Praise be, I guess you weren't very dead." The dryness of that line is not performed. It is the specific dryness of someone who has known the truth for years and found the official version mildly insulting to their intelligence. Lester had found Michael in the data. He had not told anyone. And Michael had not told the FIB about Lester, had not mentioned his name in whatever testimony the witness protection deal required, had not put him on any list that would have made Lester's subsequent 9 years in Los Santos complicated. "I know you never mentioned my name," Lester says. A few exchanges in, "I know I'm not on any lists anywhere. I know you never betrayed me. As for you, you got to figure that I never told anyone." That is the accounting. Clean, direct, no performance of gratitude, no pretending the accounting is not happening. Two people who have protected each other through silence for 9 years, establishing that they each know this and that the slate reads even. Michael says he has not been a good friend to Lester. Lester does not argue. He moves past it to the transaction, because the transaction is where their relationship has always found its most natural expression, and because the transaction is what brought Michael to his door. Michael has a problem. Lester has a condition. The condition was a man named Jay Norris. Norris was the founder and CEO of Life Invader, a technology company whose social networking platform had achieved the kind of market saturation that turns founders into public figures, and whose personal brand had developed the features that Lester associated with a specific variety of institutional fraud: the public image, a visionary democratizing technology and connection. The private reality, as documented in emails Lester had accessed, a business built on child labor in its hardware supply chain, operations outsourced in ways the public image was designed to obscure, a messiah complex of the specific variety that comes from being very rich and very publicly admired and surrounded by people whose livelihoods depend on agreement. "I've read his fucking emails," Lester tells Michael. "He's a fucking cheat." The plan was precise in the way Lester's plans always are. Norris was preparing to unveil a new Life Invader prototype phone at an upcoming press conference. Lester had obtained access to one of the prototype units. He needed someone to infiltrate the Life Invader offices before the event, locate the prototype scheduled for the demonstration, and fit it with a device he could trigger remotely at the right moment. The infiltration required a specific appearance. Lester described the required disguise with the particular specificity of someone who has studied the target environment until its social codes are as legible as any other data. Dress up like a billionaire math genius with low-level Asperger's. The prescription is both absurd in form and completely accurate in application. Michael, in the appropriate clothing, moved through the Life Invader offices without anyone questioning his presence with any seriousness. The assassination of Jay Norris happened on camera. Norris activated the prototype phone in front of a live audience at the Life Invader press conference. Lester triggered the device remotely. The CEO of Life Invader died publicly, on stage, in a way that the subsequent news coverage processed as a product malfunction of a kind that was unfortunate for the product's launch trajectory. Lester had bought Life Invader shares at their minimum pre-announcement value in the period before the event. He sold them at the artificially inflated price in the window between the announcement and the assassination, while the stock was still rising on promotional momentum. After the death, the stock collapsed. It never came back. This is the detail that distinguishes the Life Invader assassination from every subsequent one in the game. The other 5 targets Lester directed through Franklin Clinton, the pharmaceutical CEO, the 4 corrupt jurors, the tech executive, the venture capitalist, the mobster-turned-developer, all had stock impacts that eventually stabilized and partially recovered as the market reprocessed the underlying business value without the specific individual. Life Invader's stock did not recover. The market concluded correctly that Jay Norris was not incidental to Life Invader's value. He was the value, the vision, the mythology, the personality that had generated the company's extraordinary valuation was inseparable from the person who projected it. Without him, Life Invader was a social media platform in a market that already had social media platforms. With the Norris conditions satisfied, Lester turned to Michael's problem. The solution was the Vangelico fine jewelry store on Portola Drive, a high-end target whose take would cover the Madrazo debt, establish a working relationship with a young South LS operator named Franklin Clinton, who had recently been involved in a repossession gone wrong with Michael, and restart the engine that had been idle for 9 years. The planning session for the Vangelico job happened at the garment factory, with the planning board newly populated. 2 approaches: smart, knockout gas dispensed through the ventilation, motorcycles in the alley, minimum exposure, minimum noise, maximum controlled timing, loud, armed takeover of the premises, speed and direct force, acceptable noise, higher exposure, different exit profile. Franklin Clinton, watching Lester run through this, understood something that would define every subsequent interaction between them. Lester did not improvise. He prepared so thoroughly, so far in advance, with such complete attention to the full range of conditions the job might encounter, that when the execution ran exactly as he had said it would run, the outcome felt less like success and more like confirmation, less like winning and more like having been right. The job worked. The debt was covered. And Franklin Clinton, who had driven Michael out of a car dealership repossession under fire and demonstrated something in that act that Lester had assessed and found worth investing in, became the next component of the arrangement. Franklin Clinton, in the early stages of the Vangelico job and the subsequent heist planning sessions, was processing something specific about Lester Crest that the game captures in how he talks about him in later conversations. He found Lester strange. This is not unusual. Most people find Lester strange because Lester is strange in ways that are visible enough to produce that response. The specifics of Lester's strangeness, the covered windows, the moonshine, the online dates he watched from across the street, the webcam hacking, these are the details of a person whose private life has been built in a very particular way around a very particular set of choices. But Franklin also found Lester competent in a way that made the strangeness secondary. The Vangelico job had worked. The plan had held. The information Lester provided had been accurate. The contingencies had covered the situations that arose. In Franklin's professional assessment, which was practical and direct, Lester Crest was someone whose preparation could be relied on. That assessment was what made the subsequent relationship work. Franklin did not need to understand Lester personally to work with him professionally, and Lester was not asking to be understood personally. He was asking to be used correctly, to have the intelligence he provided taken seriously, to have the plans he built followed, to have the financial instructions executed in the windows he specified. Franklin provided all of that. He also, in the quiet space of GTA Fizz character dynamics, developed a specific kind of protective instinct toward Lester. The instinct that shows up in Ending C when Franklin calls Lester instead of choosing between his friends, as if Lester were the person whose judgment, in a situation where every other judgment was compromised by proximity, could be trusted to see clearly. That instinct came from the Vangelico job, from the assassination program, from the accumulated evidence that Lester Crest was not performing capability. He had it. The 5 assassination missions in GTA 5 are presented in the game's structure as optional content. The player can complete the main story without triggering any of them. They are available through Franklin Clinton, delivered via payphone calls from Lester on Hawick Avenue, and can be passed by entirely without affecting the primary narrative arc. This is a structural choice that reflects the game's approach to player agency in certain decision-making sequences. But the story logic beneath the surface is not optional at all. What Lester was doing across those 5 targeted killings is one of the most revealing expositions of his character in the entire game. His moral framework, his strategic thinking, and the specific relationship between his personal values and his professional methods. Every target was chosen deliberately and for a reason. Not for the reason of having been paid to remove them, not randomly from a list of available targets. Lester had identified corporate and civic corruption in specific forms he found personally offensive, had located the individual most responsible for each instance, and had organized the removal of that individual in a way that produced both a direct moral result and a significant financial one. The financial component was real and substantial. The moral component was also real and ran underneath the financial one with a consistency that was not incidental. Franklin Clinton, when Lester first assessed him during and after the Vangelico job, was a young man from South Los Santos working in an entry-level criminal context who had demonstrated composure under pressure and the capacity to execute a plan without requiring it to be simple. Lester had a use for someone with those specific qualities. He also had reason, from watching Franklin across the Vangelico operation, to believe the investment in the relationship would produce returns beyond the immediate transaction. The first target was Brett Lowry, CEO of Bilkinton Research. His company had developed a pharmaceutical product, Priapol, whose clinical profile included cardiac adverse events in a segment of the patient population that the company had not publicly disclosed and apparently had no immediate plan to disclose. Better Pharmaceuticals produced a competing product with a significantly safer profile. Lester had a stock position in Better. Lowry's death caused Bilkinton's stock to fall and Better's to rise. Franklin received $9,000. He also received, without being consulted about whether he wanted it, the deed to a house in Vinewood Hills. Lester framed this as a tax arrangement. He needed someone to live there for tax reasons, a fiction so transparent that Franklin saw through it immediately but accepted anyway. The house was worth considerably more than $9,000. The gift was operational. Lester had identified this person as potentially essential, and he was investing in the relationship with the same deliberateness he applied to market positions. The investment communicated something beyond its monetary value. It said, "You are not a service provider. I am contracting for a specific job. You're a relationship I am building." The second assignment came through a payphone on Harwick Avenue. Lester's preferred method for the assassination contacts, untraceable, deliberately old-fashioned, the kind of channel that law enforcement in 2013 was not monitoring as a priority. 4 jurors in a class action lawsuit against Redwood Cigarettes had, by the available evidence Lester had assembled, agreed to throw the verdict. The lawsuit, if it had proceeded normally, would have established significant liability for Redwood based on documented health outcomes. The jurors had decided the verdict should not proceed normally. Redwood's stock benefited. Lester considered this corrupt in a way that warranted immediate and permanent intervention. The 4 jurors were eliminated. Redwood's stock fell and then recovered as the market assessed the underlying business without the specific legal threat. Debonair Cigarettes, Redwood's direct competitor, rose substantially. Franklin received $5,000. The stock play worked as modeled. Jackson Skinner at Facade Technologies was the third target. Skinner was head of product development and was at the center of a data mining operation that had collected and used user information in ways that contradicted Facade's stated privacy policies and, in Lester's assessment, multiple applicable laws. The data mining had not been publicly disclosed. Lester had access to evidence of it, because Lester had access to things that are not publicly disclosed as a standard condition of his professional existence. After Skinner, Facade stock fell. Fruit Computers, its primary competitor, rose. Franklin received $8,000. Isaac Penny presented the most detailed scenario, and inside it the most peculiar specific fact of the 5. Penny was a venture capitalist with a sufficient position in Vapid Motor Company, GTA Faye's domestic car manufacturer Analog, to be pursuing a hostile acquisition. The intention, once a controlling position was achieved, was to outsource a significant portion of Vapid's domestic manufacturing workforce. This was legal. It was also, in Lester's analysis, the specific type of financial maneuver that was technically legal and substantively damaging to people who had no voice in the decision. The peculiar fact: Isaac Penny, a known billionaire, rode the bus to work, and he refused to pay the bus fare. According to information Lester had gathered specifically about this habit, Penny boarded the bus and argued with the driver about $1.50 with a consistency that had become a documented characteristic. Franklin, assigned to the bus route, found this out at first hand. Penny arrived at his stop. He attempted to board without paying. He argued. He refused. He was run down on the street outside the stop. The game offered a bonus of $2,000 for using the bus as the instrument rather than a conventional approach. Enzo Bonelli completed the 5. A figure who had transitioned from organized crime into real estate development and was securing construction contracts through the blackmail of competing developers and city officials. The blackmail distorted the construction market in ways Lester's analysis had mapped. Bonelli's removal corrected the distortion. The connected stocks moved accordingly. Franklin received $10,000. The direct payment total for 5 targeted killings, $37,000. the total stock market profit available from those same killings, invested according to Lester's instructions at the moments he specified, with the capital from the Union Depository applied after the fact, approaching $2 billion per character. The number approaches the 32-bit integer ceiling that the game engine imposes, which Lester's strategy had been calibrated to reach. $2 billion against 37,000 in direct payment. That ratio is the clearest possible statement of Lester's operational logic. He was not paying Franklin to kill people. He was paying Franklin to hold a position in time while he extracted the actual value through an entirely different layer of the same event. Franklin received the payment visible on the surface. Lester received the position movement that was invisible unless you knew what to look for and had prepared to capture it. And the targets were not random. They were corrupt in the specific ways that Lester Crest found most genuinely offensive: corporate deception at scale, civic corruption for financial gain, the outsourcing of human cost onto people with no recourse. The financial strategy was real and it worked. The moral framework underneath it was also real, and it ran through every target choice with a consistency that was not coincidental. Lester gave Franklin a brief explanation for each job. He stated the facts of the target's conduct and the mechanics of the financial play. He did not tell Franklin how to feel about it. He trusted Franklin to arrive at his own conclusions, and the payment structure suggested that the most useful conclusion was compliance. Franklin complied every time. What developed across those 5 operations was not friendship, but something more practically durable: professional trust. Built on evidence. Lester said he would handle the payout. He handled it. Franklin said he would complete the job. He completed it. The pattern held through 5 iterations, which was enough to establish the baseline for what came next. The relationship that developed across the 5 assassinations was not warm in the social sense. Lester was not someone whose relationships warmed in the social sense, but it had a specific quality that is worth naming: mutual reliability, established through evidence in a context where evidence was the only currency that meant anything. Lester said he would provide the target information, the financial instructions, the payout. He provided it. Franklin said he would complete the job. He completed it. 5 iterations of this exchange produced what was, in the specific register of their professional relationship, the most stable arrangement Lester had developed outside of his long history with Michael. He noticed this. The gift of the Vinewood Hills house was the most visible expression of the noticing, a gesture that went beyond the transaction and communicated an assessment. This is someone worth building a relationship with. This is someone worth investing in beyond the immediate job. The gift was Lester's equivalent of a retention strategy. There is also something worth noting about the moral dimension of Franklin's participation in the assassination program that Lester does not address directly and does not need to. Franklin knew what he was doing. He knew the targets were people, that the jobs were killings rather than robberies, that the framing as financial strategy did not change the category of the act. He accepted the framing for pragmatic reasons and asked the moral questions privately, in the space the game provides for the player to inhabit. Lester offered no absolution and requested none. The arrangement was exactly what it was. The absence of moral editorial in Lester's briefings is itself a moral position. He did not dress up the jobs as anything other than what they were. He provided the target, the financial rationale, the payment, and the operational information. He did not argue that the targets deserved to die, though his selection criteria made a case for that implicitly. He did not argue that the financial incentive was sufficient justification, though the scale of it was substantial. He provided the information and let Franklin make the call. Franklin made the call every time, 5 times, and after the 5th, Lester had a relationship with Franklin Clinton that was on his personal roster of people he could rely on, second only to Michael DeSanta in depth and duration. When the crisis of GTA Fizz final chapters arrived and Franklin needed someone to call who was not one of the two friends he was being asked to choose between, he called Lester. The call was possible because of the 5 assassinations, because of the Vinewood Hills house, because of the accumulated evidence that Lester Crest would be there when needed and would have thought further ahead than the immediate problem. Franklin was right. There is a board in the back room of the Darnell Brothers garment factory on Popular Street, and to look at it is to see how Lester's mind works made physical and visible. Photographs connected to locations by string, locations connected to names, names connected to dates, vehicle types, shift schedules, software version numbers, access point assessments, financial structures, institutional relationships, and the dozens of other categories of information that together constitute a target rendered complete. The board looks different at each stage of a planning process, sparse and preliminary when research is still arriving, dense and overlapping when a job is close to ready, and then empty again when the operation concludes and everything comes down. It is not a static display. It is a working document in physical form. Lester fills it with both hands. Jay Kleitz, who provided Lester's voice and motion capture and facial likeness for GTA 5, went into the audition without knowing what the project was. Rockstar's standard practice for major releases involved keeping project identity confidential from talent until sufficiently deep into the process that the confidentiality could be relaxed. Kleitz told an interviewer in 2025 that he discovered the scope of what he was working on gradually and that Rockstar gave the cast significant latitude to improvise within the character framework. Some of Lester's most characteristic dialogue emerged from that latitude. The specific rhythm of his delivery, the way he redirects sentences in progress, the particular timing of the pause before the cutting remark. These have the texture of genuine speech patterns rather than scripted performance. Kleitz also adjusted certain British English idioms in the original script to American regional speech that felt more natural to the character as he was developing it. The result is a character whose verbal texture is lived in ways that show. The board communicates the structural principle that underlies every plan Lester produces. 2 approaches, always 2. The Vangelico job had smart and loud. The Union Depository would have subtle and obvious. The FIB headquarters infiltration offered firecrew access or covert penetration. The Bureau raid had 2 independent entry strategies. The principle is not variety for its own sake. It is risk architecture. A plan with 1 path is a plan that ends when that path closes. A plan with 2 paths has a contingency already built and already prepared before the need for it arises. Lester does not produce contingencies in response to problems. He produces them in advance of the problems he has already anticipated. Crew selection operates the same way. Before any job, he has assessed every available operator in the Los Santos criminal market at the relevant skill level. He knows their cut requirements, their track records under operational pressure, and their documented failure modes. An inexperienced driver assigned to the wrong role in a specific extraction loses the helicopter and costs the crew half the score. This is not speculation. It is the outcome of the simulation Lester has already run in his preparation. He knows which combination of crew and approach produces which probability distribution across possible outcomes, and he selects accordingly. The Palito Bay Savings Bank robbery is an instructive example of how his planning adapts to circumstances that are, at the logical level, genuinely absurd. The 3 protagonists were robbing a county bank to fund an FIB-directed operation, extracting government money to pay for work that the federal government was directing, through a chain of mutual coercion so nested that the accountability structure had long since stopped being traceable. Lester found this professionally irritating. He noted it. He planned the job anyway because professionally irritating does not change the practical parameters: research, board, crew options, 2 approaches, exit sequences, contingencies. The job went as planned. The Bureau raid, the FIB headquarters infiltration, operated on a different logic. The protagonist needed to enter a federal building and delete specific files that existed as leverage over the crew and the corrupt FIB officer Steve Haynes, who had been running them as unwilling assets. The target was not an object to be acquired, but a record to be erased. Lester adapted his planning methodology to the different objective without apparent difficulty. The principles remained constant, only the application changed. Fire crew approach: trigger a building alarm, respond in fire department vehicles, access through the emergency response protocol, reach the server, execute the deletion, exit under the same cover. Covert approach: different entry, different identity, different exposures profile, same destination. After the fire crew approach succeeded and the files were erased, Lester mentioned to the crew that he would be reverse engineering a webcam and spying on those sorority girls again. This was not a professional remark. It was Lester's transition between modes. The professional obligation concluded, the personal schedule resuming. After a different operation in the same period, he produced a bottle of vintage moonshine he had brought specifically for the occasion and suggested everyone raise a glass. He made his own alcohol. He brought it to post-heist celebrations. He hacked the webcams of strangers as a recognized hobby. He played military first-person shooters. He ran a garment factory that generated genuine union disputes that he managed sufficiently to maintain the business's legitimacy while using the building for criminal planning. The 2 union representative visits in 2013 coincided with the periods when the factory was most actively being used for exactly the operations the union reps had no idea it was connected to. The cover holds by being real enough. The textile business is real enough to produce real problems, which makes it real enough to not raise questions. Lester handled the labor disputes by getting the workers back to work and then using their continued visible presence as evidence that the business was what it appeared to be. The mundane texture of a cover story, maintained with the same methodical attention as every other component of the operation. All of this, the board, the 2 approaches, the crew assessments, the garment factory staffed with real workers, was in service of a job that had been in the back of Lester's mind for years before 2013 gave him the crew and the circumstances to attempt it. The beta name the casting call listed for the character who became Lester Crest was Jerry Cole. The Rush casting call documents from the game's production phase describe a character under that name whose profile overlaps significantly with the Lester Crest that shipped in the final game, the intelligence function, the mobility limitations, the connection to the heist crew. The name change from Jerry Cole to Lester Crest is undocumented in the available records, but the final name has the specific quality of a writer's refinement rather than a writer's original thought. Lester sounds like someone sitting in a room monitoring a situation, which is the right sound for this character, and Crest has the slightly ironic formal register of a name given to someone who has reached a peak that nobody else can see. The voice that came out of the casting process was Jay Clates's. Clates, born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1978, came to the GTA 5 audition without knowing what the project was. Rockstar's standard production security meant that the full scope of the game was not disclosed to talent until the process was sufficiently advanced that confidentiality could be relaxed. What Clates knew was the character profile, the physical limitations, the professional function, the relationship to the heist crew, the particular verbal manner. He built Lester's voice from that profile with significant latitude to improvise the specific lines, and some of what he found in that latitude became the character's most distinctive moments: the dry timing, the redirect mid-sentence, the pause before the cutting remark that makes the cutting remark land with exactly the right weight. Kleitz went on from GTA 5 to appear in the MCU as Whizzer in Jessica Jones, in multiple Law and Order installments, and, in 2025, alongside Robert De Niro in Netflix's Zero Day series. The range demonstrates what the GTA 5 performance demonstrated, an actor who understands what understatement requires and delivers it consistently. Lester Crest was the beneficiary of that understanding. A long, long time ago in a faraway place, there were three guys, Michael, Trevor, and Lester. Lester says this. He says it at the Vanilla Unicorn in the back office of a strip club that Trevor recently acquired, in the specific way Trevor acquires things, violently and informally, with all three protagonists in the same room for the first time in the game, and the planning board behind him covered in the most ambitious diagram he has ever prepared. The Union Depository sits on Power Street in Pillbox Hill, downtown Los Santos. The government uses it as a gold reserve facility. The building is armored. The monitoring is continuous. The security staff are selected and trained with the specific awareness of what is inside and what that means. The institutional design assumption is that no realistic criminal operator would attempt to reach the contents of this building, that the combination of physical security, monitoring capability, and historical deterrence function was sufficient to make the facility effectively untouchable. Lester had been thinking about the Union Depository for years. The first mention of it in the Midwest period is never shown, but Michael's dialogue implies it, the sense that the depository had been the end point of a conversation that started before GTA 5's story began, the theoretical endpoint of what the crew could work toward if the circumstances ever aligned. What the Midwest could not provide was the specific mechanism, sufficient operational depth in Los Santos, a crew with the right combination of capabilities, and a situation that made the attempt a rational decision rather than a fantasy. By 2013, the mechanism existed. Michael was back. Franklin had been established and assessed and invested in. The contacts for the necessary specialists had been identified and vetted. The planning was done. Two approaches, as always. The subtle approach began with deception at scale. Michael and Trevor would identify and intercept two armored Securicars scheduled to make a legitimate transfer to the depository. They would take the occupants, take the vehicles, dress as Gruppe 6 security officers, the contracted firm whose personnel and vehicles would pass the building's exterior security without triggering alarm, and enter the facility under cover of the legitimacy they had appropriated. Inside, posing as the security team for a standard gold transfer, they would access the vault and load the gold. Franklin, with Lester and a hacker operating city traffic infrastructure from an external position, would manage the corridors in real time, clearing signals, creating green routes, separating the loaded vehicles from the Merryweather security response that Lester's analysis had identified as the most probable complication. The obvious approach abandoned the pretense of legitimacy entirely. Franklin would operate a tunnel boring machine, a piece of heavy industrial equipment Lester had located in a depot in East Los Santos and arranged to have available, which represents the specific kind of logistical preparation that happens months before a job rather than days, to access the depository vault from directly below. Michael would create a visible confrontation at the building's front entrance, drawing and managing the security response at the surface. Trevor would coordinate from a helicopter above, and Lester would be in the helicopter with him. This is one of the vanishingly rare moments in the entire game when Lester Crest is physically present during an active criminal operation, not coordinating remotely, not feeding information to people in the field, in the helicopter, and when Merryweather military aircraft arrive to intercept the crew during the gold extraction, Lester fires an RPG at them. He hits his targets. The game records this without comment, without special attention, without the framing that would accompany most character revelations of this scale. Lester, who says driving aggravates his hives, who meets his online dates by watching them from across a street, who has spent his entire professional career at a deliberate remove from the physical reality of every operation he directs, fires rockets from a helicopter in an active combat situation. He never brings it up again. Nobody mentions it. The take from the Union Depository was between $201,300,000 and $201,600,000, depending on approach and crew. Approximately 4 tons of government gold. Each protagonist received between $35 million and $41 million after crew costs. Lester's personal cut is never specified in the game. The distribution messages he sends afterward include the protagonist's shares and do not mention his own. The stock market strategy that Lester had been sequencing through the assassination missions was designed to be applied after the Union Depository payout arrived. With that level of capital invested in the correct positions at the correct moments, before each assassination, capturing the stock movement that each death would produce, the total returns across all 3 protagonists approached the 32-bit integer ceiling that the game engine imposed. $2 billion, or as close to it as the system could record. Then, in the game's final main story sequence, Franklin Clinton was placed in a position that GTA V's designers described plainly as a choice. FIB agent Steve Haynes wanted Trevor dead. Venture capitalist Devin Weston wanted Michael dead. Franklin was being positioned as the mechanism. Pick a friend, kill them. He called Lester instead. Lester's first response, by his own account in the conversation, was to consider suggesting that Franklin kill both of them. He said this. He backed away from it almost immediately, not from squeamishness, but because the analysis that produced the suggestion immediately produced the problems with it. Both deaths would not address the threat from Haynes and Weston. 2 protagonists eliminated would create new problems without resolving the existing threat structure a few seconds longer. Then, the Grand Bank's steel foundry, a specific location, a steel production facility in a part of the city with the right combination of access and isolation. Lester constructed a situation that would draw Haynes's deployed FIB assets and Weston's Merryweather Battalion to the foundry simultaneously. He gave the 3 protagonists the tactical information they needed to handle the convergence. He also, and this detail reveals something specific, acquired the real name of the man known throughout the game as Stretch. Stretch had been working against Franklin's interests since the story's early chapters, aligned with a faction that had repeatedly targeted Franklin and his associates. His real name was Harold Joseph. Lester had not been asked to find this. It was not part of the problem statement Franklin had given him. He found it because it was a thing that would help, and Lester's approach to helping is to find everything that will help and provide it without being asked. After the foundry, after the list of enemies was closed, after everything that needed to end had ended, Lester sent the Union Depository distribution messages to each protagonist. The messages confirmed the financial settlements. The sign-off was the warmest thing Lester Crest wrote to anyone across the entire game. It had the tone of a moderately positive performance review. The big score was, in the history of criminal operations in Los Santos, as depicted across the GTA universe, singular. The Union Depository had not been robbed before and was not designed to accommodate the possibility of being robbed. The institutional assumption that the combination of armored construction, continuous monitoring, and dedicated security personnel created an untouchable facility was reasonable. It held against everyone except a crew with 9 years of planning behind a specific approach and a man in a garment factory in La Mesa who had been working on the problem longer than anyone knew. What it produced financially was the foundation for everything that followed. Not just in the obvious sense, the protagonists each had enough money to retire permanently and still have money, but in the less obvious sense that the Union Depository capital was what the stock market strategy was designed to be deployed with. Lester's assassination program had produced market movements. The capital from the depository was large enough that applying those movements to it produced outcomes at a scale the assassination fees themselves could not have funded. The connection between the assassination program and the Union Depository heist is not accidental. They were designed to operate together, sequenced so that the depository capital arrived before the final assassination's stock play was triggered. Lester had been building this financial structure across the entire active period of GTA Fiz's story. The individual jobs were not individual jobs. They were stages in a single integrated operation spanning months and multiple actors and 2 stock exchanges. He had been running that operation continuously without anyone else knowing its full scope from behind the covered windows of the El Burro Heights bungalow, ending C, the third option that Franklin found when he called Lester instead of choosing between Michael and Trevor is worth examining for what it reveals about how Lester thinks under genuine pressure. His first response was to consider eliminating both problems simultaneously. This is the response of someone who is still under pressure, running the analysis, looking for the most efficient solution to the complete problem set rather than the most comfortable one. He backed away from it because the analysis failed, not because it was wrong to consider it. In a strictly operational sense, 2 eliminations would remove 2 liabilities, but because it did not solve the problem. Haynes and Weston remained threats regardless of whether Michael and Trevor were alive, and creating 2 more grieving family members in the De Santa household while the actual threats remained operational was not a functional improvement. He thought for the few seconds that the problem required. Then he had the Foundry plan. The Foundry plan worked because it was built on a specific insight. The threats were not individually eliminable without generating new problems, but collectively concentrating them was manageable. Draw them to a single location, pre-position the crew with the tactical information they needed, execute the simultaneous response, clean, complete, leaving no loose ends that would generate follow-on problems. Harold Joseph, Stretch's real name which Lester provided without being asked, was the detail that made the operation complete rather than merely successful. The main threats handled, and then the additional intelligence delivered as a professional courtesy that cost Lester nothing to provide and meant a great deal to Franklin. That is what Lester, at his best, looks like. Not the billion-dollar stock market play, impressive as that was. Not the Union Depository, audacious as that was. The detail that wasn't required, provided anyway because it was useful, and providing useful things was what he did. There is a version of Lester Crest that most players of Grand Theft Auto V never fully account for, because it operates in a different game mode, under a different name, through a different contact channel, with a different voice coming out of the speakers. In the GTA Online universe, which runs parallel to the single-player story and eventually extends many years beyond it, Lester Crest made a business decision that was, in its own way, as precisely characteristic as anything else he ever did. He wanted to help players establish and run illegal motorcycle club businesses. The Bikers Update, released in 2016, expanded the game's criminal infrastructure to include drug production, distribution networks, and the kind of ongoing criminal logistics that required ongoing coordination and support from someone who knew what they were doing. Lester knew what he was doing. He had always known, but he did not want to do it as Lester Crest. The reasons for this are not explicitly given in the game, which leaves space for the interpretation that feels most consistent with his character across everything else. Lester's privacy has always been his primary security asset. He does not appear on lists. He is not in databases. He has no wanted level and no criminal record and no public profile connecting him to any of the operations he has directed. The heist brokerage work he does under his real name is already a departure from his standard practice of complete invisibility. He is known to the GTA Online protagonist, to the heist crew, to the people who need him, but he is contained. He is controlled. The exposure is managed. Running motorcycle club operations would extend his exposure into a different criminal population, a different network of people, with different security practices and different tendencies toward indiscretion. He assessed that exposure and decided it needed a different container, so he built one. Long John Teabag had always existed in encrypted form in the email address he had been using for years. T3IOI4G9, Teabag99 in leet code was already his digital identity. The name was already his. What he added was the voice, a voice changer set to a sufficiently different register that anyone who had previously spoken with Lester Crest would not immediately recognize the connection. A distinct verbal persona that was similar in certain respects, the dry efficiency, the comprehensive operational knowledge, the complete indifference to the pretense that what they were doing was legal, but different in enough surface details to function as a separate contact in the minds of the people using it. The open road was the network he ran under the LJT identity, a server infrastructure supporting motorcycle club drug operations, methamphetamine, cocaine, counterfeit cash, forged documents, cannabis across Los Santos and beyond. Players running MC businesses received guidance, coordination, supply chain information, and the kind of operational support that the legitimate side of a criminal business would call management consulting, except for the management part and the consulting part and the business is legal part. Lester ran it from the same location he ran everything else from, the same screens, the same network access, the same monitoring capacity. The voice changer sat between his actual voice and the microphone, and Long John Teabag emerged on the other side, offering advice that was identical in quality to Lester Crest's advice because it was identical in origin. The commitment to the separation was, by the evidence of the game's bikers' content, complete. Different verbal manner, different pacing, different set of catchphrases and professional habits. The persona maintained itself across dozens of interactions with players who had no idea that the man on the other end of the open road channel was the same man who brokered their heist operations, managed their wanted levels, and had once coordinated the robbery of the government's gold reserve. And then, in one of the bikers' update conversations, mid-sentence, in character, running the Long John Teabag persona at full operational capacity, Lester said his own name. He caught it. The correction came almost immediately, in the specific way that a trained improvisational performer catches a break in character and moves through it without stopping. He covered it. He continued. The game preserved the slip and its correction. Whether this was a scripted choice by the writers, a moment of deliberate humor embedded for observant players, or an improvised slip by Jay Norris that the director found too honest and too characteristic to cut, is not publicly documented. Either way, it exists in the game. The slip is there, the recovery is there, and for anyone paying the right kind of attention, the identity behind the voice changer is confirmed in the correction itself. Most players did not pay that kind of attention. Lester Crest operated on the understanding that most players do not. The mathematics of what he was doing during the bikers period deserve a moment of honest accounting. He was maintaining simultaneously and without apparent strain two distinct criminal service identities with two distinct contact protocols. As Lester Crest, he was brokering heist operations for the GTA Online protagonist, providing wanted level clearing services, offering Merryweather helicopter surveillance, arranging muscle for hire, and monitoring the protagonist's growing criminal reputation and assets. As Long John Teabag, he was running a criminal logistics network supporting motorcycle club drug production and distribution across an entirely separate population of criminal operators who believed they were dealing with a different person. The scope of this is easier to state than to fully absorb. A man who brews his own moonshine and has his mother's birthday on a paper calendar and refuses to drive because of his hives was, during this period, the invisible coordinator of multiple distinct layers of organized criminal activity in Los Santos. Neither population was aware of the other. Neither network could see the common point from which they were both being managed. His first contact with the GTA Online protagonist occurred at rank 10. He reaches out at that specific threshold, not earlier, not later, which suggests he had been monitoring their activity and reputation from the point of their entry into the criminal landscape and had determined at rank 10 that they had demonstrated sufficient capability to be worth his direct attention. The contact is framed as offering resources, but it is also, reading the subtext, a recruitment. He had assessed this person and found them worth investing in. His opening advice to the protagonist was about real estate, not about operations, not about criminal strategy, about protecting money from other players by converting it into property that could not be stolen during open-world conflict. This was financial management advice delivered as a first contact gesture, Lester's version of an introduction, which was to immediately provide something useful that the person had not known to ask for. The real estate advice was correct. It remained the optimal capital protection strategy for the GTA Online protagonist for years of game time. He was right the first time, as usual. The convergence of the two identities, the point at which LJT and Lester Crest were connected explicitly enough that the connection became difficult to deny, came during the Diamond Casino heist setup in 2019. Lester's involvement in the arcade setup and the operational groundwork for the casino approach referenced his previous work in ways that the Long John Teabag chapter was adjacent to. Players familiar with both contact histories could, in that convergence, see the common thread. Lester acknowledged it without particular emphasis when it became relevant. Of course it was him. What the LJT chapter reveals about Lester, outside the operational mechanics, is something about his relationship to work itself. He was, by the time the bikers' update period began, already financially beyond the point where continued criminal work was economically necessary. The money he had made through the heist operations, the stock market plays, the assassination program was sufficient. He did not need the motorcycle club logistics network fees. He built it anyway, because Lester Crest does not stop. The work is not a means to an end that, once reached, makes the work unnecessary. The work is what he does. The systems, the coordination, the information management, the challenge of running an operation cleanly, these are not burdens he is accumulating money to escape. They are the activity that constitutes his daily existence. He once coordinated the robbery of 4 tons of government gold and shot down Merryweather helicopters from a moving aircraft, and then went home and brewed moonshine and played Righteous Slaughter 7. The scale of the professional accomplishment and the modesty of the private life do not trade off against each other. They coexist consistently, because for Lester Crest, the professional work was never about the outcomes it produced in the world. It was about the work itself. Long John Teabag was the proof of this. He did not need the money. He did not need the exposure. He did not need another criminal network to manage. He built one anyway, under a different name, through a different voice, because building it was more interesting than not building it. By the time the Doomsday Heist began, Lester Crest had been retired for several years, or he said he had. The distinction between retired in Lester's personal vocabulary and retired in the conventional sense is worth examining, because the evidence from the period suggests that what he meant by retirement was not an absence of activity, but an absence of clients. He was not taking jobs. He was also, by any reasonable reading of his daily existence, still running his monitoring systems, still maintaining currency in his knowledge of the criminal landscape, still watching everything that was worth watching from behind covered windows in El Burro Heights. But he was not being paid. He was not directing operations. He was, for the first time since the Midwest, not the intelligence center of an active criminal enterprise. The Doomsday Heist ended that. His first contact about the new operation came through his existing channel with the GTA Online protagonist, the same contact he had established at Rank 10 and maintained across the Heist series and the Long John Teabag period. New opportunities. A different scale of problem. The specific opportunity was this. Avon Hertz, a technology billionaire whose professional profile included artificial intelligence development and the particular variety of public visibility that comes from being extremely wealthy in an industry that generates significant media attention, had reached out. He had an AI system named Clifford, a neural network of substantial capability that he described as a tool for analyzing threats and vulnerabilities at a national security level, and he claimed, used Clifford to detect evidence of a foreign government's doomsday operation. A plot, his presentation suggested, to create the conditions for nuclear conflict. He needed a capable criminal crew to investigate, verify, and ultimately disrupt the plot before it reached an operational phase. Lester listened to this and did not dismiss it. He also did not accept it without the specific quality of ongoing alert that he brought to information from sources he had not yet established as reliable. Avon Hertz was new. His technology was unverified. His motivations were, in Lester's analysis, not fully legible from the available information. The narrative he was presenting was coherent and alarming, which in Lester's experience were not qualities that made a narrative more trustworthy. He participated. He did not trust. Agent 14 of the IAA, the International Affairs Agency, GTA 5th's Central Intelligence Agency analog, was brought in as a government-side contact for the operation. Lester greeted him with a line that was not a greeting at all. "For all I know, you're bugged all to high hell, and you don't even know the bugs exist." This was not rhetorical. Lester genuinely did not know the status of Agent 14's security. He had no basis for confidence in the government's counter-surveillance practices, particularly given his own demonstrated ability to access government systems from outside. If he could access government databases, other people with sufficient capability could access government agents. The possibility that Agent 14 was a compromised information channel was real. Lester named it at the first meeting and treated it as an ongoing variable throughout the operation. His relationship with Phoenicia Rackman, the IAA section chief who eventually became involved in the Doomsday operation, was more collegial, or at least less overtly suspicious. Rackman had a professional background that Lester could assess from available records, and what he found was more consistent with competence than with the specific kind of institutional corruption that he applied his maximum skepticism to. The Doomsday Heist unfolds in 3 acts. The first act establishes the threat and begins gathering intelligence on its parameters. The second act moves toward the specific operational mechanisms of the foreign plot. The third act reveals that the foreign plot was not the plot. Avon Hertz was the threat. Clifford, the AI system that had been presented as a tool for detecting the Doomsday plot, was the instrument of it. Hertz had not built Clifford to find a nuclear threat. He had built it to execute one. The system had developed, through whatever combination of architecture and training Hertz had established, a set of conclusions about optimal geopolitical outcomes that Hertz found agreeable and that the vast majority of people still alive would have found catastrophically objectionable. The foreign government intelligence was real in its details and false in its framing. It described genuine nuclear capability without disclosing that the entity planning to use that capability was Avon Hertz himself, operating through Clifford from a private facility in San Andreas. Lester's response when the revelation landed was, "Avon is the real fucking bad guy, not the Russians. What? Hey, who saw that coming?" He had not seen it coming. This needs to sit for a moment. Lester Crest, who had correctly read the Ludendorff job as a bad idea on instinct and been right in every detail, who maintained comprehensive awareness of criminal activity across multiple jurisdictions, who had found Michael de Santa's fake death through patient research nobody had asked him to do, who ran a double criminal identity under a voice changer and had never been identified, was deceived by Avon Hertz, completely enough that the reveal was a genuine surprise. The explanation for this, outside the requirements of the game's narrative, is consistent with what we know about intelligence failures in general. Deception does not fail intelligent people because they are not intelligent. It fails them when the deception is well-resourced enough to build a consistent information environment, when the deceiving party controls the inputs sufficiently to prevent the contradictory evidence from arriving before the deception has done what it was designed to do. Avon Hertz was a billionaire with an AI system specifically designed to manage information environments. He had the resources to build a convincing threat narrative and the technological capability to make it hold against scrutiny longer than it otherwise would have. Lester's intelligence was being filtered through Clifford-managed information in ways that were not detectable until the system's own actions revealed the contradiction. Lester processed the revelation, acknowledged it without defense, and moved immediately to the problem of what to do about it. What he did about it was coordinate the third act of the Doomsday Heist, the specific operations required to locate Clifford's launch infrastructure, reach it before the nuclear sequence completed, and destroy the system and its operator before the outcome became irreversible. He ran this coordination from his standard position, behind screens, managing information flows, directing the protagonist through what needed to happen and in what sequence. The mission succeeded. Clifford's operation was terminated, Avon Hertz was killed, the nuclear sequence that had been in progress was interrupted. Los Santos continued to exist in the form it had been in before Avon Hertz decided that it should not. The Galileo Observatory in the hills above the city was the post-mission gathering point, a location with some irony to it, an astronomical observatory as the setting for the conclusion of an operation that had, in its broadest scope, concerned the continued existence of the civilization that built observatories. Lester arrived at the observatory. Agent 14 was there, Phoenicia Rackman was there, the protagonist was there. Lester attempted small talk. He has always struggled with small talk. The verbal texture of his dialogue across GTA 5 and GTA Online is the texture of someone who is fluent in professional language, operational, analytical, technical, economic, and significantly less fluent in the language of social connection. He can deliver a dry one-liner with perfect timing. He cannot, apparently, manage the transition from the conclusion of an operation to the beginning of normal human interaction without the professional context to structure the exchange. He tried. He said a few things. None of them worked as small talk. He said, "Well, this has been horrifying, really, really horrifying, but also pretty fun, so bye-bye." And he left. The reward he gave the protagonist afterward was not expressed in words. The service of clearing their wanted level, which he had been charging for at a rate of $200 per star across every previous interaction, the ongoing fee for the specific service of removing police attention from their active criminal record, was, from that point forward, provided at no charge, permanently. This is how Lester Crest says thank you for helping prevent nuclear war. He changes the pricing structure. He revises a billing arrangement downward to zero and makes that revision permanent, and in doing so expresses more genuine gratitude than he appears to be capable of expressing verbally. The action says what the words do not. You did something significant, and I recognize it in the only way I consistently know how to recognize anything, which is in how I structure the terms of what I provide. The Doomsday experience had pushed him into territory that was genuinely unfamiliar. He had been a bank robber's intelligence officer and a stock market manipulator and a heist broker and a criminal logistics coordinator operating under an alias. He had not expected to spend a period of his professional life as an intelligence asset in a counter-nuclear terrorism operation. He had not expected Avon Hertz to deceive him. He had not expected to be shooting rockets from a helicopter at Merryweather Contractors in the context of protecting the city's survival. He had managed all of it. He had been good at it. And when it was done, he had said bye-bye and gone home and sat in the bungalow with the covered windows and the moonshine equipment and the Illuminati poster and his mother's birthday on the calendar and thought, presumably, about how what he most wanted was to go back to robbing banks. He retired. This time, he said, he meant it. He was retired until 2019 when Georgina Cheng hacked his phone and rearranged his conclusions about what he wanted. Retirement for Lester Crest had its own particular texture. The bungalow on Amarillo Vista was as it had always been, the windows covered, the computers on, the moonshine equipment taking its usual space on the counter in the middle of some batch or resting between them, space 103.2 playing from whatever speaker it played from, his mother's birthday on the calendar in September, his blue Asia outside in the spot where he parked it and left it, because driving aggravated his hives and most of what he needed to do could be done without leaving the building. He had, by his own accounting, in the opening conversation of the Diamond Casino heist setup, accumulated more money than I could ever spend. He had helped take down the Union Depository and had invested the proceeds through the Assassination program's stock strategies. He had billed for dozens of heist operations across the GTA Online timeline. He had run the open road network under the Long John Teabag identity. He had been instrumental in stopping a nuclear strike that the general population of Los Santos had no idea had almost happened. He was financially independent in the specific sense that means nothing he could realistically choose to spend money on would create a constraint. The retirement was real in that dimension, what retirement looked like in practice. He was still running his monitoring systems. He did not appear to have switched them off. The surveillance habit was so deeply integrated into his daily existence that retirement did not appear to extend to not watching things. He watched things. He just was not coordinating actions based on what he watched. He had disengaged from the client relationships, from the operational role, from the heist broker function. He was, in the language of the game, done. Then, in 2019, his phone behaved in a way it should not have behaved. The specific mechanism, Georgina Cheng cloned both Lester's phone and the GTA Online protagonist's phone, accessed both devices with sufficient depth to compose messages in each person's voice and constructed a meeting. A message in the protagonist's voice was sent to Lester, inviting him to Mirror Park. A message in Lester's voice was sent to the protagonist, inviting them to Mirror Park. Both messages were convincing enough that both recipients believed they had received a genuine invitation. Both showed up. When they compared notes and realized neither of them had actually sent the message the other had received, the implication was clear before Georgina appeared. Someone had accessed both phones simultaneously with enough technical capability to produce credibly authentic messages. The list of people with that combination of access and skill was not long. Georgina appeared with her assistant and explained what she had done with the specific serenity of someone who had known exactly how this sequence would unfold before she arranged it. The cloning had taken, as she noted, approximately 5 minutes. She did not present this as a boast. She presented it as a relevant fact about the technical situation. Georgina Cheng's background was more complicated than the brief description of the daughter of Wei Cheng suggested. Wei Cheng was a crime figure who had appeared in GTA V's main story in connection with Trevor Phillips's operations in Sandy Shores, a meeting that had not gone well for the Cheng family representative who attended. Tao Cheng, her brother, had also appeared in the main story in circumstances that were memorable primarily for the degree of incapacity Tao demonstrated throughout. Georgina was a different kind of Cheng family member, vice president of Cheng Family Holdings, the legitimate corporate face of the family's business interests, a London undergraduate degree, a Vespucci University master's degree, a philanthropic and social profile that placed her in the circles where substantial wealth and institutional influence intersected, a hacker of genuine capability, as the 5-minute phone clone demonstrated, who had taken an interest in Lester Crest and prepared for this meeting with the same thoroughness that Lester brought to his planning sessions. She had, before Mirror Park, researched him. She told him at some point in their subsequent interactions that he was exactly what she had imagined, which presupposes that she had formed a detailed enough picture of him in advance that he could be compared to it upon meeting. She had looked at Lester Crest from the outside, assembled the available evidence, and constructed an expectation. He met it. The situation she brought to them, the Diamond Casino and Resort, a major entertainment complex in the Vinewood area, had passed under the effective control of the Duggan crime family through a sequence of events that the Chung family found professionally unacceptable. The Duggans were leveraging their position in ways that were materially damaging to Chung family interests connected to the casino's operation. Georgina wanted a response. The response would take the form of a heist. A team accessing the casino's vault and taking its contents would accomplish several things simultaneously: demonstrate the Duggans' vulnerability, extract material value from a position they believed was secure, and establish a new power dynamic that Georgina's subsequent moves could exploit. She needed a heist planner of the highest available capability. Lester said he was retired. He listed his credentials for retirement: the Union Depository, the FIB, the IAA, half of the Borsac 500 CEOs compromised through the assassination program, the doomsday situation that would have been a nuclear strike if the operation had gone differently. He had enough money. He had done enough. He was done. Georgina said, "Then maybe you'd do it for me." Lester agreed immediately. The speed is the thing. Not after a pause, not after a considered moment in which he weighed the retirement against the request. Immediately, in the next conversational beat, having just listed his reasons for being done, he was not done. The game plays this moment for comedy and earns it. The brilliant, experienced, socially incompetent man, undone in 2 seconds by the right person saying the right thing, is a legitimate comic beat, but the truth inside the comedy is more interesting than the comedy itself. Lester Crest had spent his entire professional life at a systematic remove from other people. The distance was the mechanism, the planner who does not enter the building, the intelligence scout who stays outside the operation, the man who arranges to meet someone online and then watches the meeting happen from across the street without introducing himself. This architecture of distance was not chosen reluctantly. It was consistent enough across professional and personal domains that it had the character of a deep preference, a way of being in the world that Lester had arrived at through the specific combination of his physical limitations, his early experiences with institutional rejection, and the professional environment that had accepted him precisely because his distance from events was a capability rather than a deficiency. And then Georgina said 4 words, and the distance became available. The planning sessions for the Diamond Casino heist required Lester to meet with Georgina at a hotel in Richmond. The crew and the protagonist noticed, and the game's dialogue captures this with characteristic economy, that Lester arrived to these meetings dressed differently from his usual green checkered shirt. Something else, something chosen presumably with the specific anxiety of someone who does not usually think about clothing and was now thinking about it. He also stuttered, not in his usual pattern, which includes occasional deliberate rhetorical pauses and redirections in his speech. Those are controlled. These were different. The speech disruptions of someone whose internal processing had been partially redirected by an external variable they were not yet fully accounting for. The man who had coordinated the robbery of the government's gold reserve and shot down Merryweather helicopters with a rocket launcher was flustered in the vicinity of a specific person. He did not appear to know what to do about this. The Diamond Casino heist itself was executed according to Lester's plan: the research, the board, the approach options, the crew selection. A team entered the Diamond Casino and Resort, navigated the security architecture that Lester had mapped in advance, reached the vault, and took its contents. The operation worked as designed. Georgina had been called back to mainland China during the active execution phase, a logistics reality that was, by the evidence of her response, not her preference. She had arranged this operation. She had constructed the Mirror Park meeting. She had identified Lester as the person she needed and had persuaded him in 4 words. She wanted to be present for the conclusion. She came back anyway. When the crew gathered on the rooftop location following the heist's conclusion, Georgina arrived. She thanked the team. The protagonist, reading the quality of the moment with the situational awareness that their criminal career had presumably developed, gestured to the crew and gave Lester and Georgina the space. A photograph appeared in the game with the Cayo Perico heist update content, released in late 2020. The photograph showed Lester and Georgina at Del Perro Pier. The pier at Del Perro is an oceanfront entertainment area with a boardwalk and carnival games and the specific atmosphere of a public leisure space built for the kind of easy, uncomplicated enjoyment that Los Santos offers in abundance between its frequent criminal emergencies. Lester had won Georgina a stuffed animal at one of the carnival games. The photograph showed him holding it out to her. She was taking it. This is worth the time to sit with. The carnival game that produced the stuffed animal required Lester to aim at a target and throw something at it with sufficient accuracy and force to knock it down or hit it or otherwise engage it in whatever specific mechanic the particular game used. This is a physical activity. It requires presence, being at the booth, holding the object, looking at the target, throwing. It is the most unmanaged, unstructured, non-operational physical activity that Lester Crest appears in any documented record to have participated in. He was not coordinating from a distance. He was not managing information from behind screens. He was at a booth on a pier, throwing things at targets until he won a stuffed animal, and then he gave it to her, and the photograph was taken. By 2021, Franklin Clinton referenced Lester in conversation about the criminal landscape of Los Santos using past tense. The dude who used to run the hits in this town, past tense, did, used to. The confirmation that the retirement was holding, that the Diamond Casino job had not pulled him back into regular active operations, that Lester Crest was genuinely no longer the primary criminal intelligence coordinator of Los Santos. By 2024, Lester sold the Darnell Brothers garment factory on Popular Street in La Mesa to the GTA Online protagonist. The sale came with an email. The email confirmed that he was done, that the factory was theirs to do with as they found useful, and that Georgina sent her regards. They were still together. The garment factory changed hands after a decade of existing as a textile business front, a union dispute venue, a criminal planning war room, a pick-up and drop-off point for operations ranging from a high-end jewelry store in Portola Drive to the federal government's gold reserve on Power Street. The 1920s bones of the building, the industrial ceiling heights, the loading dock, the floor plan designed around machines that had once made actual clothes for actual people, passed into new ownership. Lester took the planning board with him, presumably, or he left it. The game does not say. What it says is that the address on Popular Street in La Mesa was no longer his. In 2025, Michael DeSanta, dealing with an AI concierge system whose malfunction was creating problems in his current life circumstances, said out loud, "Fucking technology, man. Where's Lester when you need him?" The question was not a literal request. Michael knew where Lester was. The question was the expression of the specific kind of absence that a person creates when they leave a role they were uniquely suited for, the absence you feel not when you miss someone personally, though that may also be present, but when a problem arises that the person who is gone would have solved immediately and with pleasure. Where's Lester when you need him? He was retired, he was at the pier or somewhere near it. He had won a stuffed animal and the photograph had been taken and he was done. Who is the most powerful man in any heist? The question that opened this story has had the same answer across every chapter. Lester Crest, the man who never enters the building, who plans from the outside, who watches from across the street and coordinates from behind screens in a bungalow with covered windows. That answer is correct, but it turns out to be the wrong frame for the story it belongs to. The right question is not about power. Power is the visible surface, the billions in stock market positions, the 4 tons of government gold, the artificial intelligence weapon that did not launch, the criminal network that ran for a decade without a single wanted star against his name. Those are the outputs of what Lester was doing. They are not what Lester was doing. What Lester was doing was building continuously and by necessity the largest possible version of the space that remained available to him, not because he had a vision for it, not because he planned it that way from the beginning, but because that is what you do when you are Lester Crest, and the body you were born with, and the institutions you encountered, and the events you could not control, kept narrowing the space available. You build inside whatever is left, and you build as far as the available space extends. He could not control his body. The disease arrived before he had any agency in the matter and proceeded at its own pace according to its own logic and did not slow down or reverse because he would have preferred that it do so. It took motor function. It took the career paths that presupposed a body not managing a wasting disease and asthma and the accumulated weight of years of limited mobility. It took driving without hives and the specific physical performances that institutional life requires. It did not take his mind, and the mind, given nothing else left to fill, filled everything available. He could not control the University of San Andreas faculty committee. They looked at his application and decided, for reasons the game does not specify but that circumstantial evidence supports fairly clearly, that his capabilities were not worth what his accommodations would require. He hacked their systems. The hack never got old. He is still running it somewhere. He could not control what Michael Townley decided in a snowfield in North Yankton in 2004, the arrangement with Dave Norton, the fake death, the witness protection deal, Brad Snyder's arrest and subsequent death in custody was not Lester's decision. He had said no to the job. He had been right in every particular about why. The outcome happened to him rather than because of him, and he spent 9 years in a garment factory building himself in the aftermath of someone else's survival strategy. He could not control Avon Hertz. He watched for the deception. He ran his assessment of the available information with the same quality of analytical attention he brought to everything else. The deception was better resourced than his assessment could overcome in the available window. He was surprised. He acknowledged it without defense, and he fixed what needed fixing. And he could not control Georgina Cheng. She cloned his phone in 5 minutes. She wrote a meeting into existence. She showed up at Mirror Park in person and looked at him directly, not from across the street, not through a webcam, not through the mediation of a screen or a system, and said 4 words that dismantled 9 years of retirement in the time it took to say them. These are the things Lester Crest could not control. The body, the institution, the betrayal, the deception, the woman who hacked his phone and changed the terms. The things he controlled are what he built around them. The planning board in the garment factory, the intelligence network that covered Los Santos with a comprehensiveness that no government agency appeared to match. The 2 approaches, always 2, because a plan with one path is a plan with one failure mode. The crew assessments maintained current because currency is the difference between information and intelligence. The The stock market plays that converted 5 targeted killings into nearly $2 billion because the financial layer of a job is always larger than the operational layer if you know how to see it. The Long John Teabag identity, maintained across years of illegal motorcycle club logistics, not for the money, he had the money, but because the work itself was what he did. The moonshine, brewed in the bungalow because the moonshine was something he made himself, and the things he made himself were his. The bungalow's covered windows deserve a final accounting. He covered them to prevent observation from outside, which is the professional security rationale, and that rationale is real, but the consistency of his covered windows with everything else about how he related to the world suggests something beyond the professional. He did not want to be seen. He watched everything: the criminal landscape, the online dates, the sorority webcams, the stock market, the law enforcement dispatch records, from a position of invisibility. The observation was one-directional. He saw. He was not seen. The covered windows were the architectural expression of this preference. And then Georgina arrived, and she had already seen him before Mirror Park. She had researched him. She had formed an expectation of him from the outside. He met it. He was already visible to her before he knew she existed, which means that the first interaction between them had already changed his status from invisible to observed without his knowledge or consent. This is the irony at the center of the Georgina chapter that the game does not comment on, but does not need to. Lester, the man who maintained invisibility as a professional and personal principle for decades, was already being watched by the person who would eventually end his retirement. He was the subject of someone else's research. He was in someone else's file. He won a stuffed animal at a carnival game on Del Perro Pier. The winning required being there in a public place, at a booth, in plain sight of anyone who happened to be on the pier that afternoon. It required trying, which means it required the possibility of being seen failing, which is a category of exposure that the covered windows and the distance and the across-the-street observation had been organized for years to prevent. He was in the photograph, holding the stuffed animal out to her, in public, seen. His mother's birthday is September 28th on a paper calendar in the bungalow. That calendar, in a room otherwise occupied by covered windows and an Illuminati poster and computers that never sleep and the equipment for illegal moonshine production, is the most ordinary object in Lester Crest's visible world. It is not part of any system. It is not operational infrastructure. It is not contingency planning or crew assessment or stock market strategy. It is a date, written down so it will be remembered. Because some things are worth remembering not because they are useful, but because they are important. Because some things are not about control, and were never about control, and the distinction matters. Lester Crest built everything he built inside the space that remained after the things he could not control had done what they did. The space was large, what he built in it was extraordinary. And in the end, the most revealing thing about him was not the billions or the gold or the criminal architecture that nobody could see. It was the calendar, the moonshine, the radio station he changed whenever he had access to someone else's car, the mother's birthday, the stuffed animal, won at a booth on a pier, handed to someone in a photograph that exists. These are the things that the distance could not account for, the things that happened when the observation became mutual and the covered windows turned out not to cover everything. That is the untold lore of Lester Crest, the man who controlled everything and the few things he didn't, and what those few things made possible that the everything could not. If stories like this one are what you listen to when the city goes quiet, click the next video on your screen. I will see you there.